Okay, Chairman, we are live on YouTube.
Thank you. There is some background noise from some unmuted speakers. Could you mute them, please, for us?
Yeah.
Thank you. Thanks. Okay. Right. Good evening. So Fiona has confirmed the start of the YouTube channel, so we can start the meeting. So welcome to this virtual meeting of the New Eastern Planning Committee. My name is Councillor Richard Cole, and I'm chairman of this committee. And this evening I'm supported by a number of officers, which go down through the list. I've got Zach Elwood, who's head of planning and economic development. Is Zach online? I haven't seen Zach yet. Beth Howland-Smith, development manager. Is Beth online? Of the committee. And this evening I'm supported.
Oopsie.
Yes, Beth is chairman.
So I missed all of that.
Yes, Beth is online.
Thank you. I've got also Marie Clark and Catherine Pearson possibilities. Are those online?
Yes. We have Marie.
Thank you very much. Alex Inglis, who's online, planning officer, Jess Robinson, Rebecca Clark, Lewis Jones, planning officer, planning lawyer. I think I saw.
Mr. Chairman, I'm a planning lawyer, Barry Devlin.
Right, Barry, you're online. Okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you. And Kimberly Sohn, who's the clerking this meeting. So as members, as you know, and officers, please use the hand raise function within Zoom to indicate you wish to speak. And please keep yourselves on mute when not speaking. And can also ask any questions are kept brief and to the point. We'll be timing speeches. And if anyone speaks for more than 4 minutes, there will be an alarm will be raised. So if any members in the meeting lose their connection temporarily, we will pause to allow them time to rejoin the meeting. And the officers are looking out for that and looking for people who might drop off. As you know, if the webcast stream fails, then we'll have to adjourn until we're able to reset the connection. So we'll proceed with item 1. Kimberly, are there any apologies from members?
We've had apologies from Councillor George Wilson, and I believe Councillor Liz Townsend has also apologised. Okay,
thank you. Committee, can you agree the minutes of the last meeting held on the 1st of July? Can you indicate if that's okay? Thank you. Kimberly, are there any declarations of interest received from,
Chairman,
from members?
Sorry to interrupt, but it was the 15th of July, the minute, not the 1st.
Apologies, my mistake.
Thank you, Councillor Goodridge. Are there any declarations of interest declared?
I believe that Councillor Gray has an interest in item A2, mill hanger.
Thank you, Kimberly. Just to repeat, although it's part of my declaration anyway, I'm a member of the Dunsfold Parish Council. The applicant on 8.2 is also a member of Dunsfold Council. I don't feel that in any way that I'm prejudiced in this respect. Dunsfold is a small place, and I know most people, but I do want to make that declaration. Thank you.
Thank you. That's very clear. Are there any other interests people wish to declare at this point? Okay. Item 4. Are there any questions from members of the public, Kimberly?
None received, Chairman.
And any questions from members?
None received, Chairman.
Thanks. If either Zach or Beth can say, are there any updates to government guidance or legislation that we should be aware of in connection with tonight's meeting?
Thank you, Chairman. Members may recall both Zach and I mentioning the business and planning bill that was passing through at the time of the previous meeting. Last week, that bill received royal assent, so it is now the Business and Planning Act, and contains provisions relating to pavement licenses, which is being dealt with by our licensing team, construction hours, workings and extensions there too, and extensions of certain planning permissions and their implementation periods. Furthermore, this week, the government announced changes to the use class order, which essentially create new use classes, and that's classes E, commercial, business and service class, F1, which is learning and
Could you put the lights on, please?
Sorry.
So who was speaking there? Carry on, Beth.
Sorry, learning and non-residential institutions fall under the new class F1, and F2 is for local community uses. With the implementation of those new use classes, we will see the revocation of use classes A, which is retail, B1, which is offices, and D, which is non-residential uses. And these changes won't be coming into effect until the beginning of September, and this will only be for new development. Until the end of August, permitted development rights will exist for the currently existing use classes, as if the new use classes weren't being introduced, if that makes sense. But if members want any further information on any of these new provisions, I'm happy to provide a comprehensive update sheet to them in due course. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, I think we should, yes, if you could send that around, please, to all members, that would be useful. But you're confirming that there's no effect of that on tonight's proceedings?
Not on tonight's proceedings, Chairman. Thank you.
Okay. Councillor Sadler, you have your hand up. Is something you wish to say?
Yeah. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Could you confirm if any substitutes have been appointed in lieu of the two apologies, please?
Thank you. Yeah, that's a good point. I'm not aware of that. Beth, I'm sorry, Kimberly, can you confirm that? You're on mute, Kimberly.
Yes, I can confirm Councillor Maxine Gale is substituting for Councillor Liz Townsend. Unfortunately, Councillor Wilson only apologised at 5 o'clock, so it was too late to get a substitute.
Okay, thank you. So, and Councillor Gale is present. I can't see.
Chairman. Yes.
Right. Okay. Right. So we'll move on to applications for planning permission, and just to read out, members, please note that the polling feature within Zoom has been set up so votes on the following items can be taken by general assent. Excuse me, or using the polling. If a recorded vote is required, it'll be done by roll call. And we have a new item now, item 7.1. I'll ask Beth to report on applications decided under new temporary delegation to the head of planning and economic development since the start of the new arrangements on 9th of June. So Beth, can you report on that, please?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. There have been 3 delegated decisions since the last meeting, and all 3 have been granted approval. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay, thank you. Right, excuse me. Right, we'll move to item 1 then, land at the Quays, Roke Lane, Whitley. The proposal is for erection of 2 dwellings and associated works at land at the Quays, Roke Lane, Whitley. The officer is Rebecca Clark. So Rebecca, could you please provide the briefing?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Rebecca is actually not able to make the meeting, unfortunately, so I will be presenting this item. Let's just open this up. So just before we run through the presentation, there is a brief verbal update to this item, and that is that an additional condition is recommended relating to the provision prior to first occupation of the highest available speed broadband infrastructure. So this is an application for the erection of 2 dwellings and associated works at land at the Quays, Roke Lane, Whitley. This is the location plan, which shows the site lying to the west of Malthouse Mead Road on the northern side of Roke Lane. The site measures 0.075 hectares. This is the same aerial view with Malthouse Mead shown centrally with Roke Lane to the south of the image. The application site is outlined in red on the picture. So this is the proposed block plan. Full permission is sought for the erection of a pair of semi-detached dwellings on this site with rear amenity space and 2 parking spaces each at the front of the site in accordance with guidance. These are some site photographs. These are the location for the photographs is indicated on the inset block plan in the top left of the screen. So this shows the front of the site as it is existing from Malthouse Mead Road. This is a close-up image of the site as it currently stands. This is a view looking north from the site along Malthouse Mead. This is from the same location looking south along Malthouse Mead towards Roke Lane. And again, further down Malthouse Mead looking towards Roke Lane. And this image is taken from the top of Malthouse Mead looking south. This is directly opposite the site. This is number 9 Malthouse Mead. There's a bungalow with 2 dormer windows facing the site. This is taken from the immediately adjacent number 1 Malthouse Mead, showing the northern boundary of the site. This plan shows the proposed street scene. So units 1 and 2 own a pair of semi-detached units with a ridge, the front elevation with the ridge height of 7.8 meters and a cat slide elevation to the north facing number 1 Malthouse Mead. The northern elevation is separated from number 1 Malthouse Mead by 4.5 meters. So the frontage of unit 2, as you can see on the plan, faces Malthouse Mead with unit 1 accessed from the southern elevation. This is a close-up of the proposed front elevation facing Malthouse Mead. This is the proposed west elevation, or the rear. And the southern elevation. So these are the proposed floor plans. So the two dwellings, both 2-bedroom semi-detached dwellings, both which exceed the relevant technical space standards, with unit 2, the slightly smaller of the 2 bedrooms, falling slightly short for a double bedroom, but is in accordance for a single bedroom. 2 small roof lights are proposed in the northern elevation in the cat slide roof, which does directly face the neighbour to the north. However, these serve bathrooms and a high level. So the main matters for consideration for members this evening are the design and impact on the visual amenity, the impact on the character of the rural settlement, and the impact on residential amenity. The recommendation is a recommendation for approval, subject to conditions 1 to 12 as set out within the officer's report, and the additional condition number 13 as set out in the verbal update in relation to provision of broadband infrastructure. Thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Alex. Okay, we have 3 speakers. The first is Heidi Gunner, who's a resident. Is Heidi Gunner on the line?
Yes, can you hear me?
Yep, I can hear you. You got 4 minutes. Please carry on.
Okay. I speak tonight on behalf of 11 households, 25 residents. We disagree with the recommendation to approve this application. Tonight, I want to concentrate on 5 points. one out of character. The officers have stated the proposed houses have a similar appearance to those built in 2009 and have included a side-by-side illustration in the paperwork. This is correct, they are similar. However, for those of you who are not familiar with the site, the two developments cannot be seen from each other. This earlier development is in fact on a different road. In our opinion, the previous development has no relevance on Malthouse Mead or this application. All the existing houses in Malthouse Mead are 1960s, 70s bungalows and chalet bungalows. We believe that the proposed dwellings are out of character with the road. 2. Size and overbearing form. This two-storey development will sit alongside 3 bungalows. While some thought has been taken to include a cat slide to the north side, the fact is that this two-storey house sits only 4 metres from the single-floor bungalow to the north. On the southern side, the 3 dwellings on Roke Lane have a 2-storey brick wall, 1.5 metres from their boundary to look out from their windows and patios. Whilst there's no visual direct overlooking, we believe this structure will be overbearing in size and scale. 3. Loss of light. The 2-storey proposal will significantly reduce the light to bedroom 2 on the south elevation of number 1 Malthouse Mead. This is the bedroom window mentioned in page 17, paragraph 2, line 8. We disagree with the officer's justification that losing daylight to the main window is acceptable as the room is served by a second window on the eastern side. The eastern window faces the road and therefore is mainly covered with a blind for privacy. The southern window is the main window of the room. It is 27% larger than the front eastern window and is not overlooked. Point 4, parking, highways and safety. Residents have parked on the shared grass verge for over 40 years. Apparently this does not constitute a formal arrangement. Approximately 16 metres of this grass verge will be lost to the frontage of the new houses. The officers note that this development does not result in any loss of formal parking. Formal or not, 3 or 4 spaces will be lost and impact all the residents on the road. When sufficient parking places is so key in planning policy, how can this be allowed? Malthouse Mead is a lane of single car width off Roke Lane with a grass verge running along the length. Regularly, you meet a car head on when leaving or entering Malthouse Mead. The grass verge nearer the junction provides a safe passing place. With the loss of 4 spaces for this development, we fear that inevitably this safe passing place will be lost to parking, making the junction significantly more dangerous. The sight line pulling out of the junction from Malthouse Mead to Roke Lane is less than half the distance recommended for new builds. The wide distance is only 20 metres versus the recommended 43 metres. This highlights the already dangerous nature of this junction. Adding the loss of a safe passing place, an additional 4 cars to the road and less parking to an already poor sight line and school traffic will increase the risk to highway safety. Unfortunately, due to COVID, highway officers were unable to complete a site visit. Lastly, point 5, the road surface. All Malthouse Mead landowners pay a share of the maintenance of the road. If this application was to be approved, the construction traffic will inevitably and unfortunately damage the road surface of Malthouse Mead, and we ask that any damage done to the surface is made good following the completion of the build, so not to financially affect the remaining homeowners. We urge the committee to take these arguments into account, along with the 23 letters of objection. Please listen to the voice of the residents.
Thank you very much. Second speaker is Brian Taylor, who is the applicant. Is Mr. Taylor online?
Yeah, sorry, just clicking the unmute.
Fine, I can hear you.
Okay, we're ready to go?
Yep, you have 4 minutes to speak, so please carry on.
I'm the owner of the keys at Roke Lane, formerly known as Wonder Bungalow, which I purchased in 1997. This application to build 2 semi-detached houses utilising the end of my garden has been made in conjunction with Marshall Developments, who own the adjacent land to the west. The combined plot is in proportion to the size of the surrounding properties and is fundamentally different to the 1979 application to build 2 properties solely in my garden. I purchased 2 titles to Malthouse Mead Road in 2019, which encompassed the whole width of the road, including a 2.5 metre verge, from Roke Lane up to the far side of number 1, which is at the end of my garden, and the far end of number 9, which faces the site. The road under these titles extends 10.2 metres beyond the boundary of the new properties, providing full access and space to reverse in and out of the site for turning. 14 metres of the verge will be taken up by the new property, which at present only one car parks in. The initial plan for Malthouse Mead was to build numbers 1 to 8. Each of these properties have off-road parking. Their titles deeds are subject to another title deed, reference SY 177322, which encompasses all the houses and the road. It provides right-of-way and access to services only, and does not include a provision for parking on anyone else's land. However, the residents of number 6 parked 2 vehicles on the verge in Malthouse Mead. I wrote to all the residents after applying the road and assured them that apart from the access required towards the rear of my garden, the remaining 27 metres of verge would still be available for parking. Under their titles, number 1 to 8 are responsible for maintaining the road, and any new residents should of course be included in the shared costs of road maintenance. It is possible for lorries to access the road, which has been used for construction of 9 properties already. The Highways Agency made no objection to this application and points out that any disturbance made by the construction traffic must be made good with the developer. Number 9 Malthouse Mead, which faces the site, was approved for development in 1974 on land similarly acquired for that purpose. Their objection to this application is in contradiction to a legal contract appended to their title, SY 420718, which includes the statement, "It is hereby agreed and declared that the purchaser will not be entitled to any easement or right of light or other easement or right which would restrict or interfere with the free use of any land to which the property hereby transferred, or any part thereof adjoins or faces, or is neighbouring, by the vendor or any person deriving title under her for building or any other purposes." Number 1 is in the same relative position as my bungalow is to the 2 properties next to me on Roke Lane, which are a very similar design to those in this application, and were given planning permission and subsequently built by Marshall Developments in 2012. Objections concerning right to light were raised by 2 residents of Roke Lane. The new properties would be to their northeast and northwest and would not therefore cause any issue with loss of light. The application has been well thought out to meet all planning regulation and gives due consideration to their surroundings and the neighbours' right to light and privacy. They fulfil an urgent need for additional housing in the area on a private road, which primarily only serves this purpose.
Thank you. The final speaker is from the parish, Barbara, is it Kinnis? Excuse me if I've mispronounced the name. Is Barbara Kinnis online?
She is on the line.
Okay,
Hello.
can you hear me now?
Yep, I can see you and hear you. Yep.
Thank you.
So you have 4 minutes to speak. Please carry on.
Thank you. Good evening. Whitley Parish Council considered this application at our planning meeting at the start of April, and we noted the large number of objections from neighbours, and we made a number of objections ourselves, which we don't feel have been fully addressed in the officer's report. You've seen the context of this. Roke Lane is a turning to the west off the Petworth Road in the centre of Whitley. It is a narrow residential road and it is one way along the relevant stretch past Malthouse Mead. As it is a main access route to Chandler School and Barrow Hills School, it carries a lot of traffic. Additionally, residents' cars are normally parked in a continuous line outside the properties on the southern side of Roke Lane, so the available road width is limited. Malthouse Mead is a narrow private cul-de-sac on the north side of the lane, and turning in and out, as we've heard, can be problematic. Presently, there are 10 properties consisting in the main of semi-detached bungalows and chalet bungalows. Parking is extremely limited and will be further constrained by the removal of the verge alongside the site, the ownership of which we understand is disputed. The officer's report makes it clear that the refusal of the 1979 application is not relevant here. But I wish to draw your attention to Waverley's own refusal of the later application, WA 2009-1382. At that point, as we heard, the Keys was one of a pair of semi-detached bungalows, and the plans to destroy half of the building and replace it with a pair of houses, now 28 and 30 Roke Lane, faced much opposition. Waverley turned down the application, stating that the proposed development was an undesirable intensification of residential development, which by virtue of the extent of hard standing and associated parking and turning will be detrimental to the character and setting of the area. contrary to policies D1B, D4B and E and RD1D of the Waverley Local Plan 2002. That application was allowed on appeal, but the grounds of Waverley's original refusal and objection can be made even more strongly in the case of the current development, where the SAVE policies from the 2002 local plan still very much apply. With regard to D1B, the design and scale of the development is certainly out of keeping with the visual character of this little close, and I would argue that D1C, the loss of general amenity, and D, levels of traffic incompatible with the local highway network, also apply. D4 states that any development should not significantly harm the amenities of neighbouring properties by way of overlooking or loss of light. But clearly this would be the case were a building of the disproportionate size and height proposed to be inserted onto this small plot. The further provision that any development should protect and enhance the street scene is clearly an impossibility given the loss of planting and the increased parking problems it will create. The officer's report acknowledges that residents may well feel that a bungalow development would be more appropriate. Nevertheless, she still considers that the requirement that any development should be well related in scale and location to existing developments has been met, citing in support of her view the very similar design of 28 and 30 Roke Lane. Yet this building fronts onto Roke Lane and is part of a very different street scene, so it is not a viable comparison. A lengthy list of conditions is attached to the officer's recommendations. If any of these conditions is impossible to fulfill, that must surely invalidate the application. Condition 6 calls for a construction and transport management plan to include details of parking for site personnel and visitors. Transparently, there is no available parking in Malthouse Mead or in the neighbouring Roke Lane, nor is there any space for the loading and unloading of plant or materials. It is scarcely possible for large vehicles to access Malthouse Mead, and they would in any case block the entire roadway, whilst any parking in Roke Lane itself would cause impossible traffic congestion at any time, and if attempted at school opening or closing times could lead to total chaos. For all these reasons, I would urge you to support the objections of the local residents and of the parish council. We all know the problems already faced as a result of the overdevelopment in this area. I urge you to refuse this application. Thank you.
Thanks very much. Okay, move on to comments from the committee. Please raise your hand if you wish to speak.
I have Councillor Sadler, Chairman.
Oh yes, thank you. Councillor Sadler.
Thank you, Chairman. Yeah, very briefly, I know the location very well, and I consider that it's most beneficial to have the scheme aired by public scrutiny at this meeting. Openness of process springs to mind, and that's all I've got to say.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Just following on from Mrs. Gunner, I had a number of residents write to me on this, and said some of my colleagues, and I assume that some of those overlap with the 11 residents that the objector was speaking on behalf of, but there was one particular issue that was in common, and it is this question of parking. And so I just did a couple of questions regarding the highways aspect. Are any of the planning officers able to confirm that someone from highways actually visited the site, or was this assessment done remotely? And my second one is more of an open question, because it is more as to how we handle this. And how do we handle a situation where we know the de facto parking situation established over decades potentially and relevant to how an area functionally works on its parking? It's then dismissed on the grounds that that's not a formal parking arrangement. Now, I get that planning applications have to distinguish between formal and informal parking arrangements, but how do we realistically handle that when we know that granting it and removing what is a functional de facto planning arrangement in an area, how do we handle that fact on appeal? And I also raise this because, being a slightly strange individual and Whitley being my neighbour, I do from time to time have a look at their planning minutes, and Councillor Kinnes has obviously raised most of those points, but parking was the one they picked up on heavily as well. And so really, how do we handle this when we know, when highways have said nothing, we know there's an issue, but it's an informal one? How do we handle that? Thank you, Chair.
Alex, do you want to comment? Maybe Beth can comment as well.
I could comment, Mr. Chairman. Barry Devlin here.
Barry, right, carry on.
Essentially, it seems to me that these parking rights though long in use, are in essence informal and have no legality at law. Whilst I have done land registry searches and can confirm that the applicant is the freehold owner of the access road under a legal title number. I won't give it to the committee, Mr. Chairman. It's just a series of numbers. He's a freehold title owner of Malthouse Lane and is entirely able to do, subject to planning control and other legal requirements, he is entitled to do entirely what he wishes with that land, Mr. Chairman. So it is a matter for him to deal with his neighbours in developing this site and come to whatever arrangements may be possible, but purely on a voluntary basis in which he holds the absolute right to dictate how land which is in his freehold ownership is utilised, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, thank you, Barry.
In terms of how we deal with those rights, I would add very, yeah, I fear that those parking rights carry very little weight in your planning evaluation because of they're essentially nebulous, although they may have existed for some years. They would have existed for a period of 20 years plus to have acquired prescriptive rights under the Prescription Act, which applies to long-term rights of access exercised in broad daylight without the apparent consent of the landowner and without force or stealth breaking onto land. So I think in this situation, Mr. Chairman, because these rights have only existed for a relatively short period, without any formal legal arrangement nor any money changing hands, essentially they are very nebulous in nature. I'm sorry if I've gone on a bit too long, Mr. Chairman.
Okay, that's
may I ask a supplementary based on that reply?
Yes, Paul, carry on. Councillor Follows that. Carry on.
Thank you. First off, a number of the residents that wrote to me, and I think the parish as well, were, I think, inferring that it had been quite some time that those rights had been established. Now, obviously, I'm not going to comment on the legal right of the applicant to do what they're doing. The question I have is that highways, in their assessment, whether the situation that exists on the ground is informal or formal, surely need to assess the impact of this application based on what will happen if it's granted. Now, in this case, it does remove or impact an informal situation of which, irrelevant of the rights of the landowner, will have consequences as to the traffic on the ground. And yet highways have given no comment whatsoever. I mean, surely they have to comment even on a de facto situation. Or they should, shouldn't they?
Can someone comment on that in terms of planning position?
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I can just sort of briefly comment on that. Yes, I can confirm that the comments from the Highways Authority were based on a desktop assessment, based or even notwithstanding that you may have seen the comments on the websites, but yes, that they were satisfied there was no impact on highway safety, and I think would be unwise to go against that. As I think my colleague Barry has set out, there's no formal parking there, so it has little protection. But yeah, that's sort of in regards to Councillor Follow's first question. I think that hopefully answers that part.
So there is no duty on the county to assess that, and there's no particular duty on us to consider the implications of what Councillor Follows is suggesting, it seems.
Well, the application was assessed on its regards to its impact on highway safety and was considered to be acceptable.
Okay. Okay, I think that's the way it is, Councillor Follows. I mean, you can vote the way you want, but in terms of,
Thank you. I take the answer. I don't agree with how that works, but I understand that is the process. Thank
you. Councillor Gale.
Yeah, thank you, Chairman. I don't see how Surrey could possibly have assessed this application without actually making a site visit, especially when you can see how many cars and vehicles are parked not only in the close but also on Roke Lane. It is going to cause an awful lot of problems. There is one other thing which at Parish Council was noted, When the two bungalows, number 1 and number 2, which are on Roke Lane, were split in half, and numbers 28 and 30 Roke Lane were built in place of number 2, the bungalow, there was a covenant apparently on the land which said there will be no more than 2 dwellings on each of the plots of number 1 and number 2, the bungalow. Now, number 2, the bungalow, the Keys, are purchasing half the land from behind what was number 1. Therefore, if a pair of semis are built there, that will actually break the covenants on both of those pieces of land, because we will then have 5 buildings on that particular square. I don't know how much this covenant has any weight, but obviously that is something to be taken into account, because that is definitely overdevelopment of what people assessed was acceptable back in 2012. Other than that, I think Surrey Highways should make an assessment again, because they obviously haven't looked at this carefully enough. Thank you.
Thank you. Barry, can you comment on the covenant situation? It appears quite a lot in the paperwork.
I'll endeavour to, Mr. Chairman. I haven't seen any of the covenants in question, but I do note that the applicant appears to have developed a property around him, and I think the covenant the lady is referred to is very likely a covenant of which he himself has the benefit. In other words, it's been taken to protect overdevelopment. It's been a covenant imposed by him on the land to which he has referred. So it's a mixture maxter of benefit and burden of covenants and who can enforce them, which is essentially not a matter for the planning system to regulate, as we know, Mr. Chairman.
Yes, the Vice Chairman.
So that's it in the last analysis.
Thank you. Yes, the Vice Chairman just reminded me of the fact that covenants are not planning matter. Okay. Councillor Higgin.
Thank you, Chairman. I have 2 points to make. Firstly, I did go to the site today to just see for myself. It was a quiet time of day, 3:30 in the afternoon. As I tried to turn into the road in question, there was a car coming out, so I had to stop, try to reverse up. There was something behind me. There was no room for it to go past me. This was a very quiet afternoon out of term time. So if there is any way to insist that highways do a proper assessment of the traffic conditions, I would certainly support that. And the other point I wanted to make is that if we were minded to approve this application, can it be conditioned so that the roadway is made good before first occupation, but after construction's completed?
Okay, we'll note that condition for when we get to the end of the discussion, I think. Councillor Demas.
Yeah, thank you, Chair. Actually, Councillor Higgin has said exactly what I wanted to say was about the repair of the road. And before people say it can't be done, it was done at the Cranley Brick and Tile down Wildwood Lane, and the condition is they have to repair it, and during regular liaison group meetings with residents, they highlight the different issues and the developers repair it as soon as practicable. So I think it's a condition I'm sure my colleagues would totally support, that we should insist on. Like everybody else, I really dislike when highways do not attend. You know, you cannot get a feel for an area by doing it on a map on a desktop, and it does not help us deciding proper planning applications and the impact on communities if they do not bother to go out. I know COVID will cause them some issues, but they don't go to many anyway. And I'm glad this committee is asking the questions, have they actually attended? I do think it's important. I say I'm not overly happy with this application. I think it's going to be quite difficult to find valid reasons that would stand up. But I would propose the condition for the repair of the road. Chair, at what stage you wish to put that to us, I'll be glad to either propose or second it. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you, Councillor Demas. Yeah, we'll hang on until the end because there may be other things that we want to take into account. Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I ask an initial question? As I understand it, this is a private road. in other cases, when there's been a private road, the county highways have not commented on it because it's not in their remit. Can you confirm that that's the case?
Can Alex comment on that?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I can confirm that when often in cases where there are private roads, the County Highways Authority will note that it's not within their jurisdiction, but nonetheless they will still make an assessment based on the impact of the proposal on the nearest highway. Malthouse Mead is, I believe, a private road, but Roke Lane is extremely close to the site, and so there would it would still be an impact that is worthy of an assessment by the Highways Authority, and so that is what the assessment will be made upon. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could just follow on then and saying, going back to the fact that they haven't visited this site, and given the fact that they do not actually comment on the issue of parking, on the issue of traffic within this lane, then I was always taught in my planning training, going way back, and we did specifically ask the question, is where councillors have local knowledge, then they should apply that local knowledge and they should speak out, and if necessary, go against what is a highways opinion. Now, this is not a highways opinion we've got here. This is a desktop exercise, which they're saying there's no impact on the public road. Now, what we're talking about here is that, certainly from my point of view, and I gather from a number of other councillors, we are not happy with the traffic issue down this private lane. And I think we must take that into account when we make our final decision. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Councillor Seaborne.
Thank you, Chairman. Can I just take a quick liberty with a quick gripe aimed at the management of the planning team? The quality of the diagrams in this evening's reports and many other officers' reports that we get simply isn't good enough. It's a failure to include scale bars and north arrows with various figures, references to coloured lines on black and white drawings, and much illegible text. It would help us enormously to focus on the real planning issues if we weren't subjected to wasted time trying to understand exactly what we're looking at in the reports. Right, gripe over. Moving on to the matter at hand. I fully sympathise with the objections that have been made, but like colleagues, I'm struggling to find really good planning reasons to disagree with the officer's conclusion in relation to this application. There is one point I would make though, and that is that twice in the officer report reference is made in sections 11 and 18 to securing refuse and recycling storage by condition. The conditions specifically cover cycle storage and the general outbuildings, but no mention is actually made in the conditions of the refuse and recycling. So if we are minded to approve, I'd like to suggest that condition 5 be expanded to include refuse and recycling provision. The fact that this condition contains a condition A, but no condition B, suggests that something may be missing. So maybe officers would like to comment on that. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you. We'll do that point now. Alex, do you think there's anything missing in that, or and indeed can we add something to do with what Councillor Seaborne mentioned about refuse and recycling?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Yes, I believe if that's deemed necessary, we can add that part that is as needed for details of refuse storage. That should be.
Okay, so we have two potential amendments. We'll take together at the end. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I really have just a few marks by the conditions and the notes. I think on page 15, the actual drawings look very attractive, and I wouldn't mind looking out over something like that myself. The overlooking, of course, has been covered by the officers, and no material concern has been raised. I'm looking at overbearing. They consider it to be of sufficient distance to neighbouring properties. There would be significant distance to neighbouring properties to the east, south, west, and such. There would be no material overbearing. Page 17, Natural England has been consulted on the application and has raised no objections. because the site looked quite, like a small part of an orchard. And it would appear that, the proposal doesn't result in any loss of formal parking area, that I do take into account the fact that informal parking in the past has been used on the front of the property. I was feeling like everyone else about the highways, so if that could be put in as a condition, I'd be happy with that. There are no problems with the trees. And the covenant's been covered. So I think I will be probably supporting. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Cotter.
Yeah, sorry, just two very quick points, Chairman. The first one, I think I know the answer, but in view of the fact that there's been a lot of concern about officer site visits and so on, and I have to say, yes, I think that's desirable, but I don't always think it's possible, and I think they have to make judgments sometimes, and I think we've had at times, particularly in current circumstances, to do some consideration of planning applications without site visits because of the unusual situation we all face. But it does actually say in the section 14 under highways considerations, it talks about in response to concern over the condition of Malthouse Mead at the time of an officer's site visit, it was noted. I assume that is planning officers and not highways officers, but just to be absolutely clear about that. And the second point I simply wanted to make is that I think I'm with my colleagues on this. I've got a lot of sympathy to some of the things I've heard about of concern about the application, but I'm really struggling to find any legitimate planning reasons on which we could refuse the application. Thank you, Chairman.
Alex, there was a question there from Councillor Cotter about which officer site visit was meant.
So thank you, Chairman. Yes, the reference to the site visit would have been the planning officer.
Thank you very much. Thank you.
Councillor Follows, you want to come back quickly?
Yeah, yes, it was a hypothetical really, which crystallised as a result of the comments from Councillor Gray. So thank you very much for those, Councillor Gray. If we were to, I agree with Councillor Costa that finding reasons to object this on highways grounds would be nearly impossible. But what would be the stance of deferring this with a specific request that highways actually come and look at this on the ground and evaluate the consequences? And the formal and informal arrangements that exist at present, because a desktop exercise has not picked up these formal issues and therefore has not picked up any consequences. If we were to defer this with a specific request that they come out and do this in person, would that be firstly acceptable, and secondly, would they actually come and do it? If we ask very nicely, of course.
I fear we're grasping at straws here, Councillor Follows, but Alex, do you want to comment on that suggestion from Councillor Follows as to whether that's a viable way forward?
So yes, thank you, Chair. I think if we're considering that is necessary reason to defer, then unless Marie or Beth says otherwise, I presume that we would be relatively safe doing that.
If I may, Chairman, it's Beth. Yes, I think we could defer on the grounds that we need further information from our highway colleagues in order for you to be able to make an informed decision on this. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. So, Councillor Farnes, do you have a proposal?
Then I would propose we defer this based on insufficient highways information, and that we request Surrey Highways make a site visit in order to furnish us with that information. As at present, our local knowledge would appear to conflict with what Surrey Highways are saying.
Is there a seconder for that motion?
Yes, I'll second that for Councillor Follows. Thank you.
Several. Okay. In which case, let's do this as a formal vote, I think, since it is a significant to defer this. So can we, the motion as proposed is to defer and request that demand that the highways come and have a look at this in person. So Kimberly, right. So yes is to defer.
That's correct. Yes will be to defer.
Yes to defer. Yeah.
So the result is the recommendation to defer has passed. So the application is deferred.
Okay. Thank you for the speakers who came online. That was an interesting debate, but we'll have to do it again next time when this comes back. So we'll move on to the next item. Item 8.2, land at Millhanger, Chiddingfold Road, Dunsfold. And Alex again, erection of dwelling with attached pool house, garage, stables and stores following demolition of existing buildings at Millhanger, Chiddingfold. Alex.
Thank you, Chairman. I'll just share my screen. Thank you. So, as the Chairman has said, this is for the erection of a dwelling with attached pool house, garage, stables and stores following the demolition of the existing agricultural buildings at Millhanger, Chiddingfold Road in Dunsfold. Just briefly, I'll run through the update sheet, which I'm hoping members have seen, which was following a request for further information, which was raised in the initial consultation response by the Surrey Wildlife Trust, and a letter has been submitted by Lindsay Carrington Ecological Services on behalf of the applicant, which has addressed these in relation to ancient woodland and protected species. So based on this, the follow-up consultation response was received, and officers and Surrey Wildlife Trust are now satisfied that the development could proceed in this light with suitable conditions attached should permission be granted. This slide shows the location plan. The site measures 14.25 hectares and is accessed via the Chiddingfold Road at the south of the site. Access is on the right-hand side of the image by a long private driveway, which is also a bridleway.
Excuse me, Chairman, we've got no map.
Yeah, sorry. Sorry. We're just seeing the first slide here.
Okay. I'm not sure. It might just be a delay on the feed through there.
Well, try changing the slide again. Try go backwards or something. Yeah. Okay. Right. We have.
Okay.
It's updating now. So we see the location plan now.
Location plan there. Excellent. Okay.
Okay, proceed.
So I'll just run through what I said on that slide. So the site measures 14.25 hectares within the red line, and is accessed via the Chiddingfold Road at the south of this picture, via the long private driveway, which is also a bridleway. This slide shows the aerial view of the same image with the Chiddingfold Road at the south of the site. This shows the proposed block plan. So the proposal is to demolish the agricultural buildings which are currently on site and to replace them with a large country home. This would take the form of an arts and crafts style butterfly design dwelling with a central column and 3 wings projecting, as you can see, with a 4th wing connecting to a single-storey courtyard containing the pool house and stables. Extensive landscaping of the surrounding area is also proposed. Just run through some photos of the current site. This is taken just in front of where the proposed dwelling would be, looking back towards the access track. This is from a very similar position, showing the entrance to the site and the current status of the buildings. These are some of the further buildings. And again, some of the feed bins that are currently on site. And this is an example of the surrounding views. This is looking north from the application site. Now, I'm hoping we have a video which also shows the development, but it's not working. Just bear with me one moment. I think we can find the video for you.
While waiting, Councillor Gale, your mic is on. Could you mute the mic, please?
Yeah, it's all right.
Thank you.
Hopefully you can see this.
Can't see anything yet.
Is there still no images of a video on the screen?
Not on my screen, no. I'm afraid videos in this sort of situation are a bit chancy, I suspect.
Chairman, I can try and I have the video on my laptop. I can try and share it if you just bear with me a moment.
Okay, it's a bit jerky, but it shows something. Okay. Alex, do you want to proceed with your presentation?
Yes, thank you, Fiona. Okay, so these slides show the existing elevations on the site. So if you've seen in the video and the previous photos, these are currently the redundant agricultural buildings. And some further plans of these. This is the existing site plan. Again, just reaffirming what you've just seen in the photos and the video. And these are the proposed elevations of the dwelling. So the majority of the proposal was a two-story dwelling with the two-story elements measuring 9.2 meters to a primary ridge, with the turret located rather kind of centrally and the chimneys extending to 11.2 meters and 11.6 meters respectively. So the materials would largely be red brick and clay tiles sourced locally where possible, with natural stone for protecting certain protecting elements shown generally in the yellow on the plans here, with windows, doors and cladding all being timber. Again, these are further proposed elevations, the southern and western elevations. So the single story bit, these are the stables on the right hand side. So the proposed ground floor plans. So there's a proposed 6-bedroom dwelling, sort of a butterfly style, which you can appreciate from these plans. The central portion of the dwelling would be 18.75 meters by 10.3 meters wide, with the 3 symmetrical wings at a depth of 12.5 meters. The courtyards in the bottom right would measure approximately 26.4 meters deep by 23.6 wide, and that houses the pool and the garage and stables. These are proposed first floor plans with the 6 bedrooms and an additional playroom. And the proposed roof plans. This is an illustrative plan of what the dwelling would look like. This is an artist's impression. And so there's the 2 wings that you can see from this side connecting to the central courtyard and the extensive landscaping around the building. So I think it would just be useful for members to run through the planning history of this site. So there was a previous iteration of the scheme which was refused under planning reference WA 2015-0838. Whilst it was accepted that the property would be a beautifully designed building, it would not meet the high bar set by the truly outstanding benchmark, which allows for approving of dwellings in isolated locations on the basis that they are truly outstanding or innovative. That proposal was refused for 3 reasons. Primarily, these were summarised as the harm to the surrounding countryside and the creation of an isolated dwelling not deemed to be truly outstanding or innovative, failure to demonstrate safe access and egress in the event of a flood, and the harm to the AGLV. So since that previous refusal, changes have been made to the scheme that has now been submitted. And so that is that the curtilage of the property has been reduced, and also an outline barn has been removed from the plan to condense the development. A lighting plan and a woodland management plan have also been submitted to try and tidy up those issues surrounding light pollution and the management of the ancient woodland, which lies just to the south of the proposed dwelling. Some hydraulic modelling has also been undertaken to demonstrate that the access and egress can be safely accommodated in the event of a 1 in 100 year flood, and the lead local flood authority and the Environment Agency are now satisfied with these details. Detailed architectural drawings have also been submitted to show some of the more intricate detail of certain features of the property, and the proposal was also subject to a design review by a traditional architecture group. And whilst the traditional architecture group were supportive of the scheme, believing it was truly outstanding, officers are of the view that this design review should be have a wider focus rather than a purely traditional and relatively narrow view, incorporating a range of built environment professionals, which means that it should be holistic to get a good impression of whether or not it would be truly outstanding in the wider context. This kind of tool, a design review tool, should also generally be transparent and include the local planning authority as well, which wasn't the case in this instance. To this end, the local planning authority, yes, they should be involved in the process, and this was suggested at the time. The recommendation for this application is as set out within the officer's report, and the application is recommended for refusal based on the following summarised grounds, which are the creation of an isolated dwelling in a rural and unsustainable location that fails to accord with the exception of paragraph 79 of the MPPF 2019. And so that is very much similar to the previous one, but that was paragraph 55 in the 2012 MPPF, hence the difference. And the second reason is for the failure to respect the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside or the landscape character of the AGLV. So just before I conclude, I think it would be useful for members to show paragraph 79 of the MPPF, against which this proposal is generally to be assessed, which sets out the criteria for approving such dwellings, being that they should be truly outstanding or innovative, reflecting the highest standards of architecture, helping to raise standards of design more generally. Okay, thank you, Chairman.
Thanks, Alex. So we have two speakers. The first is Rupert Jones, who's the applicant. Is Mr. Jones online? So there's a long list of. Mr. Jones.
Yes.
Okay.
Yes.
Okay. So you have 4 minutes to speak. So please carry on.
Right. My wife and I have lived in Dunsfold for 34 years. Currently, my wife is a church warden, and I'm vice chairman of the parish council. In April 2005, we bought these redundant chicken sheds at a public auction. The underbidder was a consortium from the travellers community, which, since the site was already served by mains, water and electricity, intended to demolish the existing structures and, without planning permission, use the 17,000 square feet concrete base as pitches for a substantial number of caravans. Such an intention caused huge concern and anxiety within the village, which ended with our purchase. Between 2005 and 2010, we sought an appropriate future use for the redundant buildings, which were no longer fit for agricultural use. We and our advisors had numerous discussions with planning officers at Waverley, but no viable long-term solution could be found. In September 2010, we gave Ross Sharp from Yengo, an award-winning architect with an exceptional reputation for designing traditional houses, an extremely wide-ranging brief, in effect, to design an exemplary family house which would reflect and respect the local landscape and building styles, in particular using the vernacular as required by the Dunsfold Village Design Statement, which is a material consideration under the current development plan. Ross has responded to that brief with the design before you this evening, an evolution of the 21st century of the arts and crafts movement, which is firmly rooted in this part of Surrey and includes some of the earliest work by Sir Edwin Lutyens. In 2015, an application based on that proposal was submitted, but was refused under delegated powers for a number of reasons, as has been mentioned. We decided not to appeal that refusal, but to work with your officers to resolve the issues they had raised. This refined scheme, with the requested additional information and clarifications, has resolved all but one issue: is this design of the exceptional quality so as to satisfy the policy? In our pre-applications discussions, Your officers advised us that they did not have internally the expertise to decide that central issue and asked that we had the design reviewed by an independent peer group. The overall scheme, both building and landscaping, was subjected to review by a panel of 5 independent architects selected by the Traditional Architectural Group, which is a linked society of the RIBA. This panel included the architect for phase 2 of the Prince of Wales development at Poundbury and an architect based in Godalming, who is the past winner of your council's design awards. As your officers have reported, that review concluded that the design clearly satisfied the test laid down in the paragraph 79. However, your officers have concluded that whilst they do not have the expertise to evaluate the design, they are able to reject that conclusion. This evening, it is your decision. Do you believe that our design satisfies the test which is set out in your papers? Your officers accept that it is a beautiful design, but consider that it falls below the bar. We have provided a peer review from a panel of 5 independent leading architects who have no doubt that the design exceeds that bar. As to harmful and urbanising encroachment, this is not a greenfield site. The existing buildings have laid empty and unused for 25 years and comprise 2 8,500 square feet sheds, each 170 feet long and 50 feet wide. As you have seen, they are industrial style agricultural buildings which clearly represent a harmful encroachment into the surrounding rural countryside. This proposal envisages a smaller replacement building which respects and reflects the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside and the landscape character of the AGLV, sitting at the heart of our 35 acres of farmland and woods. After 15 years and countless discussions with your officers, with our advisors, but most importantly with residents in our village, we remain convinced that this proposal is a wonderful opportunity not only to remove a blot on the landscape, but more positively to deliver a beautiful addition to our village and to facilitate ecological advancements as well as a woodland management programme. I sincerely believe that this proposal will deliver a design of exceptional quality. Its design is truly outstanding and will significantly enhance its immediate setting whilst being sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. I would urge you all to support this application.
Thank you. Second speaker is Stephen Hayward, Chairman, I think, of the Parish Council.
Yes, good evening.
Can you go ahead? You've got 4 minutes. Please proceed.
As we've already heard, this application was submitted following a previously refused application for the construction of a single dwelling without buildings and associated ecological and landscape improvements following the demolition of existing poultry sheds on a farm outside the village of Dunsfold. Dunsfold Parish Council notes that the applicant has taken note of the officer's report from that previous application and addressed the issues raised, and that the local planning authority has now considered that the changes now make the application acceptable apart from 2 points. Point 1 is that the proposal represents the construction of a substantial country house in an isolated rural location within the countryside beyond the green belt. And that paragraph 79 of the NPPF states that such development should be avoided unless one of at least 5 conditions apply. Dunsfold Parish Council believes that the conditions in section E are all met. That's section E of paragraph 79. The design is of exceptional quality in that it is truly outstanding, reflecting the highest standards in architecture and would help to raise the standards of design more generally in rural areas. Members of Dunsfold Parish Council are not architectural or design specialists, but we believe that our comments and observations, although those of laymen, are still relevant. We can see that the revised detailed drawings clearly demonstrate a high standard of building by the use of handmade and carefully thought out detailing. The overall design of the building using the Lutyens butterfly design principle as a basis, but modifying it to create a contemporary space that sits well in the landscape, is a well thought out design and a clever way of respecting the arts and crafts philosophy, which is so typical of this area, and bringing it into the 21st century by using modern building techniques. Design is also about how the development connects with the landscape, and the independent design panel recognised that the proposal was very much landscape led, consisting of a subtle connection of the design with the landscape, using locally sourced materials which reflect the hues and tones of the countryside. Also, section E says that the design would significantly enhance its immediate setting and be sensitive to the defining characteristics of the local area. The local landscape is characterised by sporadic large houses tucked away in remote locations. The ability to remain away from the public eye is part of what makes Surrey attractive to some people. And in our experience, those same people often give back to their communities their time and or money, and so form a very valuable part of that community. And on point 2, the proposal represents a harmful and urbanising encroachment onto the rural countryside setting and fails to respect the intrinsic character and beauty of the countryside or the landscape character of the AGLV. The site was originally constructed and used as an intensive poultry rearing plant on an industrial scale, which generated noise, pollution and light. The proposed residential use will not generate such disturbance and as a consequence would be a definite improvement on the rural countryside setting. The existing buildings are unattractive and deteriorating, and Dunsfold Parish Council has concerns over this as we know they contain asbestos, which has the potential to harm the environment if it's allowed to break down and deteriorate further. In addition, Dunsfold Parish Council would like to point out that the development is fully supported by the Neighbourhood Plan Steering Group and had a very positive response in a Neighbourhood Plan Village meeting as a site for a single dwelling of this type. It's also interesting to note that the Parish Council cannot recall ever reviewing any other significant planning application such as this, attracting such a large number of neighbour responses, all supporting the proposal without a single objection. Dunsfold Parish Council believes that the proposal would provide an outstanding design which would enhance its surroundings, is sensitive to the defining characteristics of the area, and would exhibit the highest standards of architecture. For all these reasons, we believe that it complies with paragraph 79 of the NPPF, section E, and we think it should most definitely be approved. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, just before we proceed to members' comments, I can ask Barry a question. It was mentioned there that this counts as a brownfield site. My understanding was that agriculture use does not count as brownfield. Can you just clarify that point, please?
I think that's correct, Mr. Chairman, yes.
Okay, thank you. Okay, right, so any comments from members? So I've got John, Councillor Gray.
Thank you, Chairman. This is my ward. I'd like to thank Alex for a very good report. I think we've heard from the two previous speakers the issues. There's no objections from locals, there's no objections from any of the statutory authorities, and it's all down to those two issues that have been identified. But just as background, this is a chicken shed. It is one of 3 sites in the village that formed an industrialised chicken business. One of the sites has already had effectively permitted development for 5 houses going through the planning stage. The access is down a narrow shared lane, part of it's bridleway, and incidentally, it's right next to a glass box, probably a truly outstanding house, but a glass box that was approved in the village. There's a second site which has already had a single dwelling, and 2 of the other buildings are also going forward for planning. So that, let's be sure on this site will be built on, right, one way or the other. The applicant is being very straightforward, I think very ambitious. I certainly wouldn't like to pay the bills for it, but it's a wonderful house and a great asset to the village. I mean, Dunsfold is 232 houses in the settlement, and that's over 30 acres. But there's also some 220 other houses in the village, around 240 acres. With a number of hamlets. And I think this is the point. Isolated, probably not with Braintree, and the hamlet just down in Blackness has something of over 20 properties. And that's just at the entrance to the track. Thank you for showing the drone footage. That certainly, it was sent to me yesterday, and I certainly helped me to get a view in the absence of having a site visit. The plan, I've been involved in the neighbourhood plan, and the most important thing from the village point of view is we don't feel we can put all 100 houses inside the 30 acres of the settlement at 232 already houses. I mean, you can't keep basically pushing that envelope out. So the village basically supported the fact that we wanted something like 40% of the houses, and we have 100 allocated to us. That's 100 out of 500 total dwellings. So it's a very large percentage increase, but the village was prepared to take it, providing we spread those around the parish. And one of the things they said they wanted to have between 5 and 10 individual plots, self-build or otherwise, that make up that number. I think you have to make your own mind up as to whether this is truly outstanding. I don't feel that we should, because we are traditional, that we should turn around and say that this has not been assessed. I just wondered whether the original Lutyens house would have got through this planning committee. It is an exceptional house, and in 50, 80 years, it's going to be an asset to the village and something that people talk about. So from my point of view, it's got a lot of merits for basically approving it, but I will listen to my colleagues and see what they say before I make my final decision.
Councillor Cossa.
Thank you very much, Chairman. Can I first of all thank our two speakers, and can I also thank Councillor John Gray, because I think between them they pretty eloquently articulated much of what I believe about this application. Let's again just look briefly at the context. We've had no objections. The parish council and most local people are clearly in support of the application. It's quite unusual to have no objections at all and people only writing in support of an application. But as a planning committee, I absolutely accept we have to address the planning issues here. And the key issue is clearly the condition for the isolated dwelling, condition E. Is this or is this not a truly outstanding building? Well, I'm very happy to say that from my perspective, I think it passes that test. It has been subjected to an expert panel who have looked at this and reached that judgment. I have read what our own officers have said about this, but clearly there's a significant degree of subjectivity about this, and as John Gray I think indicated, we have to make our own minds up. I think we would really not be doing a service to this community if we refused this application, and I am more than happy with my responsibilities as a member of planning committee that this does meet the necessary test that I think we have to apply to actually grant rather than refuse this application. One last point, if I might, Chairman, perhaps in anticipation of people who sometimes like to argue, and I understand why on applications of this kind, we must be careful about not setting precedents and so on, apart from the fact that each application is going to be different, and I think sometimes we make too much of precedents. I think that we're going to be very hard pressed anywhere here or indeed other parts of the country to find a precedent that has an application for such an outstanding piece of design put in front of it. And I think we really ought to support the application.
Beth, do you want to make some comment?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. Members, I'd just like to just clarify the paragraph 79 exception under 79E for truly outstanding. Further guidance is actually provided to amplify the MPPF in the MPPG, and it does state within the MPPG that the panel members of any design review panel must be sorry, I'm just finding the right section. They must be diverse and inclusive, drawing upon a range of built environment and other professional expertise. So I would just stress that this is a traditional design review panel focusing on traditional design. Furthermore, it does actually state that these design reviews need to be transparent and accessible. Now, transparent, in my view, is not something, not a privately resourced design review. It hasn't involved officers, and I understand what Councillor Cossa is saying regarding a precedent for policy for particular types of development. There isn't much in the way of precedent in planning in terms of each site on its own merits. There can be precedent in the way in which we apply policy, though, and I would just urge members to act with caution in terms of applying, stating that this is an exceptional design, because it does set a dangerous precedent going forward for similar schemes under using private design reviews. That's all I wanted to say, Chairman. I just would urge members to exercise caution and perhaps just take a look at the MPPG. Thank you, Chairman.
Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Chairman. A lot of what I was going to say has been said by others. I mean, we as a planning authority do have to, or as planning committee members, do have to apply our own views as to whether the design of this building meets the high bar of truly outstanding design. And I have to say that what the parish councillor said did meet with, said a lot of things I would have liked to have said, and I'm not going to repeat it. I do think that when one is considering this, the fact that the traditional architectural panel is a traditional architectural panel is something which I would have thought would have been suitable for this site. I would hate to have seen some modern design building in this location, and I think a traditional design is absolutely the right thing that should occur. I hear what our officers say, and Beth in particular, concerning the setting up of this, and that Waverley officers are somewhat upset that they weren't involved on the panel. But on the other hand, if what is said by the parish councillor is right, our officers made it clear they didn't have the expertise in this field of outstanding design, and therefore wanted a panel to form a view. It seems slightly perverse to, if it is true, and I would ask the officers to comment in due course, if the officers felt they didn't have the expertise, and the experts have now produced a view, and now the officers say they don't agree with it, it doesn't really add up. So at the moment, I'm minded to not go with the officer's recommendation on the basis that, in my view, this is an outstanding building, and I haven't seen many buildings as good as this in many years in the borough, and I would like to compliment the applicant on the design and trying to build something as beautiful as the one that he's wishing to do. But I will hear what other people have to say, but at the moment I'm minded not to accept what the officers are recommending.
Alex, do you want to comment? I think you said before, we didn't expect to trump what was being said in a discussion, but we did expect the council to be involved, officers to be involved in discussion, and that didn't happen.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. That's right. And as I take on what Councillor Goodridge just said there, that whilst we are in a position to comment on the design, to meet this exceptionally high bar of truly outstanding or innovative, which in this case is the truly outstanding option, it's when similar schemes have been assessed in Waverley, there's been a full and open design review that has often employed the services of, say, for example, Design Southeast and other such panels that say do go through that whole process of a design review with the local planning authority, and that is, as Beth said, fulfills that holistic and innovative and transparent criteria of in the MPPG. The design officer did also comment on the scheme, which and the view of her was that, again, it's not been demonstrated to the satisfaction of officers that it does meet that high bar without that full and open design review. And And whilst the private review that has been undertaken does carry weight, it is still the officer's view that in the absence of that holistic and all-encompassing review, that we would be in danger of, say, as not setting a precedent as such, but yeah, that's the kind of avenue we would be looking to go down.
Thank you. Councillor Higgin.
Thank you, Chairman. I was expecting to hear some comment as to why exception C to 79 isn't relevant here, because it seems to me that this is reuse of redundant buildings that is going to enhance the environment. So I'd want to know why that's not a relevant consideration.
Alex, can you comment?
I can. Just bear with me 1 second. Councillor Higgin, would you mind if I have a look at that and come back to you in a second?
Yes,
okay.
Of course.
Councillor follows.
Thank you, Chair. Now, the 1 point I was going to pick up, Beth has picked up. I really do have concerns that I know we're not setting a precedent with a particular application, but we are setting a precedent as to what level of standard we are willing to accept, which I imagine would then have comparative weight when reviewed at in other appeals. And certainly I'd ask the council here to comment on that. But in practice, if the standards for such design review are known to all and by the applicant, you have to ask why they didn't follow that process through if they were consciously aware of them. And whenever somebody does that consciously, I have pause as to why they did that. Because if somebody has chosen deliberately not to use the full and open transparent version of a process and decided to use the private version, it does give me some pause, and I would hate to set the precedent that we are okay with that. I'm not going to class this as an implied threat, but it was obviously dropped in by the applicant that it was bought partly to stop traveller incursion, and I certainly do pick up that implied alternative on the radar as part of this, and obviously that's part of the local discussion on this subject. But I do think we shouldn't be setting a precedent for the private internal design reviews that come out with an opinion if there is a formal standard for an open way of doing this that is recognised. So my quick question to Beth is that is a standard then that from the outside the applicant will have known is how is expected to go, and they've chosen to do something else.
Beth, can you comment?
Thank you, Chair. Yes, I mean, the MPPG is available for the world to see. The applicant's agent would be aware of this, and I believe that they were advised that a design review would be required as part of the assessment of this application. I can't say why or why not they decided not to go down that route, but generally speaking, it is an independent design panel that we would want the views of, and we would certainly, in the interests of that open and transparent discussion, we would wish to be part of that as representatives of the local planning authority. Thank you, Chairman.
Chair, I'm more
yes.
just to finish my remarks based on that comment. Then I have to support the officer's original recommendation, as I would not wish to open the door to doing this any way other than an open and transparent way.
Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I disagree with the comment that was made that we have to reach our own views. We do not necessarily have to reach our own views without taking into consideration the views and particularly the planning laws. I do commend both Stephen and Rupert, not only for their presentation, but I do think it is an outstanding design. So congratulations on that. And obviously, it does replace horrid buildings. And I know also I'm a big believer in arts and crafts design. But unfortunately, I'm looking at the relevant planning constraints. I am a representative for the council on the area of outstanding natural beauty, and this proposal and this area where you've asked for permission, although it's an outstanding design, I agree with that, it is in the wrong place. This is countryside beyond the green belt, area of great landscape value, and it's on a bridle way. There are ancient woodlands nearby, let alone the flood areas. So I'm thinking it's lovely, a lovely building, but I'm not happy with where it's being proposed because of my very, very big, and I'm sure an awful lot of you people, even on the parish council at Dunsfold, respect the countryside as I do. Thank you, Chair.
Alex, sorry, I missed your hand before. Do you want to make a comment either presumably on the last speaker?
Yes, so thank you, Chairman. I actually just wanted to go back to answer Councillor Hegan's point about paragraph 79, part C, which says, and I'll just read from the MPPF here, that isolated homes may be permitted if the development would reuse redundant or disused buildings and enhance its immediate setting. I would just clarify that would be a reuse rather than demolition and a complete rebuild, as is the case in this application. Thank you.
Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, as you know, I often comment on climate change and the various adaptations that go into buildings, and often negatively because they don't put them in. I have to say, having read the sustainability statement, that this development has taken into account the requirements for the future. It has made considerable efforts. And so on that grounds, I commend it in that respect. Solar panel arrays, there's a ground source heat pump and various high thermal efficiency, sustainable biomass stoves, which will be fed from the local woodland. These are all very positive things. There's also a lot about biodiversity and a positive approach to enhancing biodiversity. So again, I commend that. I think that's excellent. It's really nice to see people taking these things into consideration. On the negative side, I have to say that I know it's kind of being a bit picky, but for it to be truly exceptional, I think it would really need to meet all its own energy requirements. At the moment, as far as I can gather, the solar panels won't generate enough energy, and therefore there'll still be a requirement to use the grid. So I think that's a missed opportunity. And I think if we're talking about truly exceptional buildings in 2020, they have to meet highest possible standards in terms of meeting energy efficiency and carbon neutrality. And so therefore, I think it doesn't meet that, although it does come close, and it is a very commendable effort on that. But I would urge that if you want to be considered truly exceptional, that you need to think a bit more about carbon neutrality. And that's my comment. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Gray, do you want to come back briefly?
Yes, Chairman. I don't know. I wanted to come back at the end. I noticed that Councillor Cossa's hand's up. Perhaps we could take him first.
All right, Councillor Cossa, you make your
yes, thank you, Chairman. I will be very
remarks.
brief. I just think I need to expand a little bit on the question asked by Councillor Follows and the reply given. Now, Councillor Follows, it seemed to me, was effectively asking, was the applicant clear about the process that had to be followed here and knowingly did something else? Now, the reply we got from our officer, which I wrote down, was, I believe they were advised that an independent design assessment was required. Well, they did an independent design assessment. I think I want more certainty and clarity as to whether the evidence is there to show that clearly what we have been told should have happened in detail was clearly articulated to the applicant.
Well, Councillor Cossa, it's in the MPPG, we've been told. I mean, these are professionals. I mean, they must know what is there. But okay, Alex, do you want to come back on that point again?
Yeah, sure. So thank you, Chairman. I'll just sort of run through and say with these type of applications for truly outstanding or innovative design, a design review is a tool that can be used to support that argument. Strictly speaking, you don't have to do that, but it is very much advised. And throughout the lifetime of this application, we will, as case officer, myself and others suggested to the applicant that an independent, holistic design review should be undertaken, and it was unlikely that we would be in a position to support and come down on the side of this is truly outstanding in the absence of that. As you've said, and as we know, there was an independent private review of the proposal, but yes, we believe that in accordance with the advice in the MPPG, which as Beth said is widely available, a holistic and transparent review should be undertaken. I hope that answers the question.
But you said it's not obligatory. Just to be absolutely clear, there's no actual requirement. It's a should rather than must.
It is not strictly required. It is for the council in this case to decide whether or not the design is truly outstanding. As officers, and as previously been in the case in Waverley, an independent and holistic review has been utilised just to really support that argument and to give councillors and officers the confidence that it is truly outstanding.
I'll leave it there, Chairman. Thank you.
Councillor Gray, could you sum up? I think you wanted, but briefly, please.
A couple of points. I mean, unfortunately, the applicant can't come back, but I did have cause to come in and take issues on behalf of the applicant with planning. There was a very long delay between certain issues on this. It's my understanding that the council does not have a written policy in terms of what it requires from an independent review. And yes, the NPPF and PG is there, and it says that it should be a panel, an independent panel. Well, if you're basically looking to get an assessment of whether a traditional building, right, is outstanding, because anyone can do an arts and crafts style house, but if that building itself is going to be truly outstanding, then you would basically go to somebody who understands what it's trying to achieve. As the glass house in Dunsfold that I was talking about, that must have gone through the same process, and you wouldn't necessarily have a traditional building group looking at a glass house in order to do it. So I make that point to you. The applicant can't come back, but don't think that there weren't issues perhaps on both sides. And I'm sure that the applicant did not knowingly, willingly, and purposely ignore the council's demands because it would have been a waste of his time and a waste of his money. If I could just go back onto it, the applicant didn't make an issue of it, but if you stand on his site and you look towards Chiddingfold, you will actually see the other chicken sheds at Dunscopse, which they got planning permission. Well, they got a permitted permission on that.
Councillor Gray, I think you're putting a different line now. I think you've had enough time on this. Can you please?
Well, I was
sum up, please.
Going back to say that on this site, if you're talking about the effect on the green belt, which was made before, there's a very good chance that someone could get this site and could actually, on the same footprint, produce houses on there. So we should bear that in mind.
Okay, thank you. Okay, there's no more speakers, so I suggest we go to the vote. So get this right. So wrong piece of paper. So the recommendation is permission be refused. So Kimberly, could you put the vote, please? So remember, 4 is to refuse.
So, Chairman, that's 6 votes to refuse, 7 votes against, and 1 abstention. So the recommendation to refuse has not been carried.
Okay, so we move on to the procedure at the back of the which is that in the case In this case, someone should propose a request an alternative recommendation and seconder. Can someone propose an alternative recommendation?
Well, I propose a recommendation that this application is supported and approved, and that suitable conditions are applied to this.
Okay. At the moment, the motion is to pass the to approve the application. So is there a seconder for that motion?
I'm happy to do that, Chairman.
Okay. So in that case, the procedure is that myself, the Vice Chairman, propose a seconder, and lead planning officer will leave the meeting. Fiona will control this process, and we will come back with an alternative resolution which allows a proper approval of this application. So Fiona, I believe you can arrange for those people to be moved to a side room, or whatever the term is. Is that correct? Is Fiona online?
Great. Yes, I was just muted.
You're still muted.
Chairman, can I just ask a point here?
Yes.
When we've had something that we wish to reject, we obviously have to go through and we have to put the reasons down there. Here, we're talking about something where there's a number of conditions. It's going to be quite difficult for us to come up with those conditions. And have we not actually delegated that historically?
Well, I think the procedures, we will discuss that. The proposed seconder, chairman and vice chairman will discuss that with officers, and we'll come back with a proposal to members to approve. That's the procedure. So that's what we're going to do. Okay.
Chairman, I'm having some problems with operating the breakout room. If you could just bear with me, please.
Yep, we'll stand by for 5 minutes.
Do we know what's happening, Richard? The breakout room seemed to be all those that weren't us. Councillor Follows was in the breakout room.
I've been nowhere except here. So let's let Fiona try and resolve this.
Okay.
This is the first time this has happened in my experience. I don't. It probably has happened on West, but it hasn't happened here on East.
Question, Chairman. Do all councillors go to the breakout room, or is it just a select few?
No, it's the chairman, the vice chairman, proposer, seconder, and the lead planning officer, where we concoct a recommendation that we can come back to committee for them to approve.
Thank you.
Unfortunately, the procedure of putting people in the breakout room seems to be stuttering.
Perhaps we need a naughty boys room as well.
Councillor Sinbin, yes.
Are you volunteering, Paul?
Always, John.
If we can't do it, we'll have to do it in open session. I mean, if this, I mean, it's just a.
I'm sorry, Chairman. It might be better to save time and do it in open session. I'm struggling with setting this up, unfortunately. Apologies.
Okay. Right. In which case, officers, can you suggest? I mean, it's obviously on something this large, one would expect a very large number of conditions on an approval. It's been very hard for you to generate those conditions in real time, isn't it? Beth, if Beth is still online, is she? I can't see her. Yes, Beth.
Hello, Chairman. I believe that Alex does have a schedule of conditions proposed on in the eventuality that members decided to go against officer recommendation. So I will leave that for Alex to talk to.
Okay, Alex, do you have those in a presentable form?
Sorry, thank you, Chairman. I do have a list of scheduled conditions, 19 conditions which have been recommended. I'll see if I can share this screen. Hopefully you can see this list on my screen now.
Yeah, we can see it, yeah.
So the condition one would be the approval of the plan numbers, which just needs updating on the plan numbers for the approved drawings. Second condition would be for the sample of materials to be used in the construction of the external surfaces to be submitted and approved in writing prior to any development taking place. A third condition, which was recommended by the county archaeologist to secure an implementation of archaeological works prior to work commencing. A fourth condition with regards to tree protection for a prior to commencement tree protection scheme to be submitted and approved. Fifth condition would be again pre-commencement to secure a suitable scheme of landscaping and tree planting on site as recommended by the tree officer. A sixth condition, which has been recommended by the Lee Local Flood Authority with regards to a sustainable urban drainage scheme. And similarly, a verification report to confirm that that has been suitably implemented prior to first occupation. Moving on to conditions by the Highways Authority. So there'll be a construction transport management plan condition to include the following details for the parking and loading, storage of materials and routing of vehicles through the access, which is of course a bridleway. And that also includes a commitment to undertake regular inspections of that bridleway to repair any defects due to the impact of construction traffic. There's also a condition for then putting in a fast charge socket for electrical vehicle charging. 10th condition with regards to confirmation that there'll be no harm to the ancient woodland. So vehicles carrying out on site should be undertaken in a way that avoids the impact of that area, which was confirmed to be the case by the applicant's ecologist. Appropriate fencing would be implemented to ensure that that was protected during construction works. Prior to the removal of any trees on site, these trees shall be subject to a bat roof suitability assessment as recommended by the Surrey Wildlife Trust. Similarly, by the Surrey Wildlife Trust, there'll be a sensitive lighting management plan submitted and approved. A 13th condition, which recommends a precautionary approach to works in reference to reptiles and amphibians. Which also has a caveat that should any great crested newts be found on site, that all works must cease and a license applied for. Further, that the updated ecological appraisal submitted with the application, the details of the mitigation strategy for reptiles must be carried out. Works to trees, shrubs and hedges and any other vegetation should also be undertaken in a precautionary manner with regards to dormice. Any trenches left open overnight shall have a ramped means of escape for any reptiles that should fall in. Timing of works to avoid the primary bird's nest season of early March to August inclusive. Prior to first occupation, details to be submitted demonstrating that the dwelling meets the requirements of 110 litres of water per day. And finally, that prior to first occupation, the highest available speed broadband infrastructure shall be provided. Thank you, Chairman. I hope that please redirect to any questions that you have. But yeah, the majority of those are recommended by our statutory consultees. Thank you.
There's in discussion on the WhatsApp. There's a point about needing reasons for approval. What would those be in this situation?
Sorry, Chair, if I could. I mean, ultimately, this is for members to articulate why they considered that planning permission should be granted and why they considered that the development accords with the development plan. Because officers recommended refusal, it's not really the place of officers to provide that reason. However, we are happy to assist in any particular wording.
Okay. So it's raised proposer and the seconder to come back with those terms, with those conditions. So, Councillor Gray, do you want to propose a condition of that sort?
Yeah, I just got one question on the conditions, if I could, and that is that there were certain things put in terms of its sustainability, and there's no condition there that refers to sustainability. Have I? And the sustainability proposal. So is that something, Alex, that is implied, or do we not need a condition in?
So yeah, thank you, Chairman. I'll come back on that one quickly. Then if we wanted to include a condition with regards to the sustainability statement, that's something that we could potentially look at. Maybe direct that one to Beth or Marie if they wanted to input on that. I think we could probably condition that the development proceeds in accordance with the sustainability statement and measures outlined in that document.
That would suit me. Chairman, I think that there are two things that we need to cover in terms of the reasons for approval, and that is the fact that we consider, taking all things into account, that we consider that this is a truly outstanding design in there, and that secondly, that taking into account the previous built form and everything else, that we don't consider this as harmful to the countryside. So I mean, they're the two reasons that I would put forward as wishing to approve it.
I share that, Chairman. I mean, they absolutely are the two reasons. And indeed, if you go to paragraph 31 and the officer's conclusions, those are the two areas in which they state that they wish to recommend refusal. And effectively, we are saying that on both those areas, as John's just articulated, we take a different view. We do think it's outstanding, and we don't think that that harm is provided to the area.
Mr. Chairman, as we are supposedly in a breakout room, I've got a couple of questions for Alex, please, on those conditions.
Yeah, sure. Carry on.
Thank you. There were a number of pre-commencement conditions there, and it's my understanding that they have to be agreed with the applicant before they can be put down in writing as part of any planning permission. There must be a SIL liability that should be included, possibly, and also I'd like to see any permitted development rights removed and subject to planning permission. Thank you.
Alex, do you want to come back on that?
Yes, sure. Thank you. So I'll go through those in turn. I think apologies, Councillor, I forgot the first one. I think that with regards to the SIL liability, we would normally impose that as an informative, just reminding the applicant there would be a SIL charge. In this case, it may be that they would be able to claim an exemption under a self-build clause. Moving on to the second or third point with regards to permitted development rights, we can absolutely remove permitted development rights if the council seem fit. Apologies, you might have to remind me on the last query. I think the first thing you...
The first one was the pre-commencement conditions.
Yes, that was it. Sorry, pre-commencement conditions. Yes. So prior to issuing the decision,
how we manage this this planning permission if we haven't got their agreement to those pre-commencement conditions.
I would imagine that I think in this case we can agree to, or we could agree the conditions that would be imposed, and then before issuing the decision, the confirmation of the applicant would need to be sought to those. And if that wasn't forthcoming, then possibly the permission would have to be refused on that basis.
Okay. Yeah.
Sorry, is that's very similar to a Section 106 agreement wording that we would expect them to accept that. If they don't, then don't go ahead. Is that right? Is that what you're suggesting?
I might have to direct that question to either Beth Marie or Barry.
If they don't agree to pre-commencement conditions, they can't commence the development, can they? Because they'd be going against the conditions of the permission.
If I may, Chairman, sorry, it's
Beth, Karen, yes. Karen, Beth.
Basically, the imposition of a condition is to render development acceptable. So it's implicit, therefore, that without that condition, development would be unacceptable. So therefore, we would require the, by law, we require the agreement of those pre-commencement conditions. And if there is anything that they are not prepared to agree to, then we would have a dialogue. We'd probably speak to the chair and you, vice chair, as to whether or not we could look at the wording and, you know, bring it forward through into the scheme. So, you know, not potentially prior to commencement, but ultimately, if it does go to the heart of the permission and there is no agreement, we would have no choice. The regulations are that we would have to refuse. Thank you, Chairman.
Okay. So, Councillor Darcy, you're not in the breakout room, but I'll give you a. Do you want to say something about
Sorry,
the conditions?
I didn't realise. No, I just wanted to support Councillor Gray on the condition regarding the sustainability statement. That's all.
Okay, thank you. All right, so we've seen the conditions that Alex put up. So the two substantive ones are that that it is considered that development is of outstanding merit and beauty. Is that right? Outstanding building, and is therefore meets the conditions of those particular conditions of the of the regulations, and it is considered that it is not harmful to the countryside. Then we've added two more, which was about the sustainability, which was mentioned a moment ago, and there were a number of points from in terms of that were raised by Councillor Else. Alex, can you remind me again what those were?
So the additional conditions related to, I think Councillor Gray's point on the sustainability statement and the measures set out within that document, and then also the removal of permitted development rights through, I would imagine, classes A through F.
Okay. And then on commencement conditions, there'll be a suitable language added to allow that to be agreed with the applicant at some point.
Yeah, so prior to issuing the decision, we would need the written confirmation of the applicant that they agree to the pre-commencement conditions. Without that, we cannot issue the decision.
Okay. Right, so we have a motion to approve the development, approve the application, subject to conditions, and we've just been discussing. So we'll go to a vote on that. So in this case, we're voting to approve.
So that's 10 in favour of granting planning permission, 3 against and 1 abstention. So planning permission is granted.
Okay, thank you very much. So in that case, we'll move on to the next application. Item A3, land at Arbuthnot Hall, the Green Shamley Green. Proposal for erection of 2-storey hall building following demolition of existing hall. Relevant demolition of an unlisted building in a conservation area. And Alex, it's you again.
Yes, thank you, Chairman. You might be getting bored of me by now. Okay, thank you. So I say this is the Arbuthnot Hall, the replacement of a 2-storey hall building following the demolition of the existing. So prior to getting into the presentation, just run through what you hopefully saw on the update sheet, and that is that since the publishing of the agenda, 4 additional neighbour representations were received on this application, which were objecting on the grounds of those set out within the update sheet. It's considered that these comments were all considered to have been addressed within the body of the officer's report. And then since the publishing of that update sheet, a further 7 letters of objection have been received, largely on the basis of there's no provision within the building for a stage for amateur dramatics, the reliance on the business from outside of the village, and therefore the additional parking impacts that would have. a lack of disabled parking, the lack of an indoor sports hall, overdevelopment on the site, and the potential issues of lack of business and funding as a result of the current global pandemic. An additional letter was also received, making generic support for the replacement of the current hall. So this shows the location plan. So the site is located on the southern side of the green in Shamley Green. The current building is 1.5 story, or largely 1.5 story village hall building with single story extensions. This is the aerial view. This is the property just here, with the green to the north. This is the proposed block plan, which shows that the proposed building sits largely on the same footprint, with respecting the existing front building line, with the available parking area to the front. Some site photographs. This shows the current frontage with the available parking space. This is the elevation that faces the green. This is also the frontage and the sides. In the foreground, you see an access that leads to the neighbour at the rear of the property, which that access is currently owned by Waverley, with the right of way over it by that neighbour. This again, the site frontage, the current parking arrangements, and what's also seen in the background is the immediately adjacent neighbour boundary house. This is the side elevation taken from the amenity space of the immediately adjoining neighbour. So this is the current sort of front end of the building. And some further photos taken from the neighbouring amenity space of the sort of the central and the rear part of the side elevation of that building. So this is on the other side. This is the access to the rear of the property, and this is going to the neighbour at the back. And this is the current view of the rear elevation of the property, and this is taken from the first floor bedroom of the coach house, which is the house to the rear of the site. These are the existing elevation plans. They show the 1.5 story with single story additions that are currently on site. And similar to the previous plan, you've seen the existing site plan. So these are the proposed elevations. So the proposed replacement hall would sit largely on the same footprint, with a ridge height of 8.45 metres at the highest point, with a crown pitched roof at to the rear, featuring a feature staircase at the front elevation to access the balcony at the front. So the bottom of these two plans shows a side elevation which has the ridge and then a crown pitch, and then another slightly lower crown pitch at the right at the back. And these are the other elevations. So the dotted line on these plans, which is probably more clear on the bottom photo there, shows the outline of the existing building. And the proposed roof plan with the ridge at the front, and then 2 sections of crown pitched flat roof. So this is a proposed ground floor plan. So the main hall itself can be subdivided to make 2 slightly smaller spaces. The main entrance to the property is from the top of this plan, which is the eastern side of the building, with sliding doors on the frontage opening up to the site front, which is largely the sort of car parking area, and then onto the green. And the proposed first floor plans show that the more informal bar and lounge area at the top, with sliding doors opening onto the balcony overlooking the cricket green, and the fire escape via the external staircase. It's worth noting, some members may recall a previous iteration of this scheme, which was refused under the reference WA 2018-1435 for a replacement village hall. So there were 4 reasons for refusal of that scheme, and that being the greenbelt harm as a result of the building being materially larger with no very special circumstances presented, the lack of justification for the loss of an undesignated heritage asset within the conservation area, harm to residential amenity of both of those adjoining neighbours that we've seen by way of overbearing impact and overlooking, and that it had also not been demonstrated that there would be no harm to protected species. So by way of comparison elevationally with the previous scheme, the currently proposed scheme on these plans is always at the top. So these are the side, the front and rear elevations. And these are the side elevations facing the immediately adjoining neighbour. Hopefully you can see the dotted outline of the currently existing scheme. And then from the other side. The recommendation is as set out within the officer's report that the application has overcome 3 of the 4 reasons for refusal that were imposed previously, but the building does remain to be seen as materially larger than the one it is to replace, and that the very special circumstances have not been put forward to outweigh the harm to the greenbelt or any other harm, and therefore permission is recommended for refusal. Thank you, Chairman.
Thank you, Alex. Okay. We have 3 speakers. The first is Sarah Sullivan. Ms. Sarah, Sarah, do you? I think I saw you online.
Am I speaking now?
Yep. So you have 4 minutes to say your piece. So please go ahead.
4 minutes. The Arbuthnot Hall was built as a living and useful memorial to Foster Fitzgerald Arbuthnot by his widow Eleanor and given to the village. Eleanor Arbuthnot built the hall to further educate villagers, provide a sports facility and library. The Arbuthnot's were a local philanthropic family living nearby at Upper House. The hall was designed by internationally renowned arts and crafts architect Charles Harrison Townsend, 1851 to 1928. Not only is there a garden village of his designs at nearby Blackheath, but he designed a number of imposing public buildings such as the Bishopsgate Institute, the Whitechapel Art Gallery and the Horniman Museum in London. The design for this village hall was exhibited in 1906 at the Arts and Crafts Exhibition Society in London. Is the proposed building fit for purpose? Well, the CGI image, which we haven't seen tonight, is very appealing, but the proposed hall floor area is a little confusing. The existing hall, 281 square metres. The proposed hall, 328 square metres for a gain of 47 square metres. If the build cost is over £1 million and no cost details have been submitted, it makes no sense. The local amateur dramatic society known as Shades were not aware of the proposed new hall that doesn't include a permanent stage, only a temporary platform with no wings, no backstage, no lighting gantry as the ceiling is too low. The proposed hall does not meet ECB rules, English Cricket Board, separate home and away changing rooms with facilities, being able to view the cricket pitch before going out to bat. The proposed floor of the hall will be subject to cricket studs internally, and this forms part of the changing rooms, and they'll be mashed up basically. The bottom line is the proposed building is a 2-storey with a spiral staircase on the front elevation, which is immediately accessible and subject to vandalism, along with all the glass bifolding doors. Local Plan 2018 HA1 policy. This proposal will harm the conservation area and cause a loss of building of local merit, a BLM. And this is according to the Victorian Society and Save Britain's Heritage. National Planning Policy, paragraph 197. The justification to make the decision submitted by the applicant is insufficient. The harm has not been fully assessed to the conservation or the building of local merit. The applicant provides no evidence of alternative options that have been considered other than demolition, which is assumed. No follow-up provision to ensure the provision of new development will proceed after the loss has occurred and being in line with paragraph 198 of the NPPF. Agreed. The present building has suffered dreadfully by poor extensions. A lavatory block placed across the prime location and front entrance porch originally had windows on either side with views of the green. Also, over the many decades, the basic lack of maintenance. Internally, There is an existing beautiful vaulted timber framed hall, which I'd hoped you'd see tonight, but you can't see it. It's light, airy, and deserves to be cherished, not destroyed. And I think I've made my 4 minutes. Is that okay? It's gone very quiet. Did you hear me?
I'm sorry, I muted myself to listen to you and I'd forgot I was muted. So thank you for that, Sarah.
Okay.
Tony Hodgson, I think I saw you online. You have 4 minutes to say your piece.
Yes, good evening, Mr. Chairman and councillors. Following the refusal of our planning application in 2018, the chairperson at the time recommended we should discuss the matter with planning officers to find a way forward. We met twice with the planning officers and there were subsequent discussions between them and our architect. The application was refused on 4 points, which we believe we have addressed. The proposed building will be materially larger than the one it replaces. We have reduced the footprint at the front by 1.8 metres and at the rear by 1 metre, bringing the rear of the building away from the neighbouring coach house. At the side abutting boundary house, we have stepped back the elevations to minimise the overbearance to their side, and we have reduced the roof line to match the existing level by incorporating a small part of the ridge as a flat roof. With a reduction in bulk and with a hip roof at the front, we consider we've made the building less overbearing. On the first floor, we've reduced usable floor area to give us a minimum acceptable room area to service facilities we need for viability, resulting in an increase in habitable area of only 114% of the overall existing building, and therefore is not unreasonably larger than the existing building it replaces and within the 115% we told was acceptable. Number 2, the proposed demolition of an existing building of undesignated heritage asset. We have produced an extensive and detailed heritage report, plus a design and access statement, which we believe mitigates the perceived harm to the conservation area. The new building would still continue in the heritage style, with a recognition to the past and incorporate most of the historical artefacts of the old hall and a vaulted style roof. Number 3, the proposal would result in harm to the residential amenity of Boundary House, overbearing impact and overlooking. We have consulted with both neighbours to address their concerns, but have not been able to agree a full compliance with the Boundary House owner. But that was never likely. But we have made many concessions, as previously mentioned. Number 4, protected species survey required. We have completed this survey to comply with policies and completed all other surveys. We would confirm that before we submitted plans for any rebuild, the committee consulted the village with leaflet drops, presentations, and 3 options to choose from. The result of this poll was 83% in favour of extensions or a rebuild. Of these, 61% wanted the hall rebuilt. We held open days in order that the village could view the architect's plans, and it is a fact the owners of properties surrounding the green, except one, are pleased with the architect's impressions and are anxious for the proposed new hall to be accepted, seeing it as a considerable improvement to the current village scene. It has been documented the fabric of the existing hall is failing through no fault of the committee, who have spent lots of money or as much as they can afford to spend on servicing it, and unsuitable for current day requirements, highlighted recently when village halls are allowed to reopen, and this has not been possible for us due to poor ventilation, inadequate toilets, pinch points and other constraints. The hall is the centre of the village and the focal point of the village green. Shamley Green deserves better than its present eyesore. We trust this revised design will take into account the previous issues, which will enable you to support this application. And this afternoon, I only received from our architect notification that the case officer's noted dimensions are incorrect. He's already referred this evening to the ridge height being 8.45 metres. In fact, fact, our drawings show 8.35. We have shown a length of the building of 21.59 metres. The case officer says 22.5, which is nearly a metre difference. We specifically incorporated into our drawing AR13 comparisons between existing and proposed front elevations, and has not been added into the case officer's report, which makes it 4 square metres smaller, not bigger, as claimed in the report. Provision of stage, which was mentioned by the speaker, there is a pull-out stage. It is multi-purpose, so it can serve as a sports hall. The English and Wales Cricket Board, yes, we can't comply because we had to draw back on what we wanted to build in the first place. But it's far better than the facilities which the 145-year-old cricket club has at the moment, which is quite frankly changing in the hall. I don't think I need to say any more. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Howard, you have 4 minutes to speak now.
Thank you, Chairman. As the local member for Shamley Green, I did want to bring this item to the committee as it has been controversial in the village, and I felt that the decision needed to be made in an open way through the committee system rather than just delegated to officers. I feel the officers have given a fair summary of the current application and the issues. I have just one correction to make regarding the parking situation on page 68. Like many villages, parking is always a challenge in the centre of our villages, and Shamley Green is no exception. So a reduction of parking or an increasing in demand by a bigger venue would have adverse effect on residents around the green. There is reference made to alternative parking being available on a field. And I've confirmed with officers today that this is referring to common land on the opposite side of the road, which is used once a year for the village fete with permission from Waverley Borough Council. Under normal circumstances, it's an offence to park on common land. So this would not be a viable alternative for parking. In fact, all the green space surrounding the hall is on common land. And just last June, there was a petition to Surrey County Council Highways from the residents of nearby Hullmead Road due to requesting a solution to the antisocial parking and difficult parking situation that we have in that area. I recognise very much that Shamley Green Hall Committee have put in a huge amount of effort with this application, and they have worked hard to overcome some of the concerns of the previous application. However, having read the officer's report, I'm afraid I do not feel there is sufficient evidence to overturn the officer's recommendation. Thank you.
Thank you. Okay, we'll move to discussion. I mean, as always, please, speakers keep their comments to the point. So far, no one has raised their hand to speak. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I did study architecture, and I particularly love the arts and crafts style. And as the first speaker said, you know, I've looked into this. I've actually visited the Bishopsgate designed property in London. I have looked at the buildings that have been put up in the same style in Blackheath. And if I were living in that village, I'd certainly try and put a grade 2 listed designation on it. I know that you've recognised it as a building of local merit, but it was first of all established as a cricket pavilion style building. And I come from a family of cricket enthusiasts. Even my daughter is an enthusiast. But And the other point that was made, and I think this is important too, it was originally designed as a reading room to improve the, I suppose, the quality of education for more of the local farming people in the village. And as such, I do not like the idea of it being demolished. I'd prefer the idea, if I were living in the village, of it being restored and loved even more than it is. And if you look at the original building itself, it is absolutely beautiful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Goodrich.
Thank you, Chairman. I, of course, live in the adjacent village, so I know the Arbuthnot Hall well, and appreciate that on the one hand, it is a arts and crafts building of some merit, against which there have been some ghastly additions to it, which are not very attractive, particularly from the green. Mr. Hodgson, when he spoke, mentioned that officers have allegedly put in wrong dimensions, and I was going to ask if our senior planning officer could comment on that. A matter that also concerns me is the parking, and I see from the report on page 68 that with the floor space that's currently proposed, on the basis we've got the floor space correct, we're 5 short in parking spaces. And I know of as a fact that Shamley Green has great problems so far as parking is concerned, great problems. And I would be grateful, so there's no misunderstanding as to what the officers mean by the nearby field. I'm sure Councillor Howard is correct. I know that basically it's common land all round, but just so that we are absolutely clear, I don't know whether it's possible to mark on the site plan or to indicate on the site plan where this adjacent field is, because if it's the common, then they're not allowed to park on the common. So that's not a solution, and I would be grateful for the officers' comments on the basis that the nearby field is not allowed for parking, whether their views on parking might be somewhat different. But we had a site visit last time, so we did have a look at it from both the neighbours. It would appear that the neighbours are now, the officers are happy so far as the neighbours are concerned, but it seems to me to have been a fairly small reduction in size. At the moment, I'm with the officers, but would welcome any comments from our senior planning officer, please. Thank you.
Do you try and work through those points in order? So, Alex, do you have a comment on the issue about the size of the proposal?
Yes, thank you, Chairman. I did check the measurements before the presentation, and so I believe that they were correct. I apologise if there were some slight errors. If I think the stated discrepancy was in the ridge height of 10 centimetres. It's, I said last time I measured it on the plans that were submitted, it did appear to be as stated in the report. In response to Councillor Goodrich's second comment about the parking, we do conclude within the report that there is currently a provision of 14 to serve the hall as existing. That is not proposed to change, and so there will still be 14. The council's parking guidelines do conclude that 19 spaces would be required, or an individual assessment. Sorry, which in this case, based on the fact that it's 5 short, there is no restrictions on the surrounding street parking, and I think as Councillor Howard's covered quite well, the nearby field is the common land, which has been used, as I understand, a number of years now for the village fete once a year for a special for the village fete on a special agreement with Waverley. So I appreciate that maybe wasn't as clear as it could have been in the report, but yes, that reference was referring to the once a year use for sort of what would be peak time, I suppose, for the hall. But yes, I hope that answers those questions, but please do let me know if there's anything further. Thank you, Chairman.
I believe there was a point about the area as well. I seem to be some question about whether the area of the building was misstated. Did you catch that point, Alex?
Sorry, well, again, yes, I think as far as I can see, I measured and checked the area as well as the sort of other dimensions, and I understand that they are correct based on the plans and what's stated in the report.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair. I was going to talk about the parking, how I couldn't support anything that asks you to breach the law, but when you look at the reasons that the officer has put on this, it's very clear that there's no special circumstances are being put forward to outweigh the harm to the Greenbelt. I've listened to everybody's comments, I've listened to the speakers, the officer, and I still haven't seen anything that shows special circumstances, and that's what we should be looking for. So unless my colleagues, I've listened to what my colleagues say, but I'm proposing that I'm going to support the officers on those grounds. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Darcy.
Yeah, I'll get to my favourite subject, which is sustainability, and was disappointed to see that the new design didn't really make many concessions to addressing sustainability. I appreciate it's difficult in such small footprints that they've got to squeeze it in, but if you're going to justify demolishing a heritage asset, I think you have to meet the very high standards of sustainability so that the building will be fit for the future. And I don't get the feeling that that's the case. I think the emphasis has been on what it looks like, which is understandable, but you've got to also take into account the considerations of running the building and also how the impact it has on the environment in the long term. There's very little mention in fact, of biodiversity. So again, they could have made some concessions towards, I don't know, green roofs or something, green wall, who knows. And water use in a building like this will be considerable. And again, there's not really been any imaginative use or a way of addressing that. So I'm a bit disappointed by that. And I think on that grounds, I don't feel that we can justify demolishing a heritage asset. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Follows.
Thank you, Chair. Firstly, I'll just support Councillor Darcy's comments. I think when we're talking about extenuating circumstances to build in the Greenbelt, just as we were talking about outstanding design before, if they've not made a particular effort, particularly for a public community space like this, to really go above and beyond in terms of its sustainability, then for me it doesn't tick that box to begin with. Other than that, I'll wholly back the comments of Councillor Reid and the ward member, and will be supporting officer's recommendation to refuse. Thank you.
Councillor Higgin.
I also am minded to support the officer's recommendation to refuse, but listening to the discussion, are we not missing additional reasons that we should be citing for refusal, particularly the lack of adequate parking? Because it seems to me that if there is a refusal, it's only the grounds that are cited that then get addressed the next time round, and that if there are points on parking and potentially sustainability, should they not also be reasons for refusal?
Okay, there's no more speakers, but so that Councillor Howard, you get a chance to come back with brief remarks in a second, but let's just deal with the last point about me. Alex, I believe on parking grounds, you believe that the conditions are met. I mean, in that there is at least potentially nearby parking, not the common ground, but common land, but enough to make up the required number that we have in our policy.
Yes, so thank you, Chairman. So we have no policy as such for that. We have the council's parking guidelines document, which for this use of a building suggests that for a building of this size, 19 spaces would be required, or there is a caveat of that, or an individual justification and assessment. In this case, officers are considering that, and with the support of the County Highways Authority as well, who raised no objection, that the 14 spaces provided in the current parking arrangements, plus the availability of parking on surrounding roads, which is not restricted and so therefore can't be discounted, would be sufficient. And that's not taking into account the potential or otherwise use of the common land on a once a yearly basis, as currently is the situation. Thank you.
I think Councillor Egan also mentioned the lack of sustainability, as raised by Councillor Darcy. I don't think we're offending any policy, are we? This application doesn't offend any policy that we could cite.
I don't believe that there would be a policy that we can actively refuse on the lack of measures to make it sustainable.
Yes.
Yeah, our policy encourages sustainability, but I don't think that there would be anything that we could specifically refuse on, as you say, Chairman. Thank you.
Yes, perhaps one day, Councillor Darcy, we'll have such a policy, but not quite yet.
So,
okay. So, Councillor Howard, you have an opportunity to come back for brief remarks, not just to finish off the debate.
Thank you, Chairman. I don't have anything more to add. I haven't heard anything tonight that has made me reconsider my position. So I'm happy to hand back to you, sir.
Okay, thank you. In that case, Kimberly will move to the vote. So the recommendation is to refuse. So 4 is to refuse.
Thank you, Chairman. That's 12 votes in favour of refusing planning permission and 2 against. So planning permission is refused.
Thank you very much. Okay, we'll move to the final item. It is a final item, yes, which is the land at Westbrook Mills, Borough Road, Godalming. And this time it's not Alex, it's Kate.
It's Jessica.
Oh, that's Jessica, sorry. It might have been Kate. Anyway, it's not Alex.
It's not Alex.
Right.
I've never shared my screen before, but I'm going to give it a crack. So let's just see what happens. Okay, is everyone okay if I just run through it as is here? Because it's not going to go into the main PowerPoint presentation.
It's clear for me at least. So
okay,
carry on.
Brilliant. So the application before you this evening is at Westbrook Mills, Borough Road in Godalming. It concerns the erection of a 4th floor roof extension to existing buildings 1 and 2 on the site to provide 29 dwellings, including 9 affordable. There's also within this application alterations to the elevations of buildings 1, 2 and 3, a layout of parking and landscaping works. Just before we go any further, the proposed drawings also show an additional 99 dwellings which do not form part of this application. They have been provided permission through a prior notification application which was approved in 2018 on the site. So I believe that members have had the benefit of seeing the written update sheet today. This concerned the County Highway Authority's consultation response, where they've raised no objection to the application subject to the inclusion of conditions and informatives. It's also within that update sheet, I've outlined a bit further that Natural England have raised no objection subject to SANG provisions at Eashing Lane being secured via a legal agreement. So I hope that clarifies that part of my report, which may have been unclear. So moving on to the application before you this evening, the application site is marked in red, and this is building 1, this is building 2 and building 3, which currently exist on the site and were former office buildings. This is an aerial view of the site, so you can see building 1, 2 and 3 here. The Meath is to the southwest of the site. The railway line runs to the east of the site, and you can see Memorial Gardens here in the centre of Godalming's over here somewhere. So I think just before we go any further, I'm going to give you a bit of a potted history of the planning history on this site, because it is a bit complicated and convoluted. So if we go back to 2017, there was a prior approval, which is the permitted development of conversion from office to residential. This was refused permission by the council, but then was subsequently allowed appeal by the planning inspector. After this, a second prior approval was submitted in 2018, and this gave permission via the permitted development again for 128 dwellings. This was granted permission expressly by the council. In 2018, they submitted an application to provide a further 24 dwellings in the roof. This was because under this application for prior approval for 128 dwellings, they wouldn't be able to fit the dwellings into the roof area on the 4th floor without amending the roof structure to conform to building regulations. This application was put before committee in 2018, and it went with an officer's recommendation to approve the application. The permission was overturned by the committee on design grounds and subsequently was appealed by the applicant. The appeal was dismissed on technical grounds because they didn't submit a signed Section 106 agreement, but the inspector concluded within his report that the design was acceptable. So then we move on to the two applications, WA 2019-0984 and WA 2020-0682. These applications are a later edition of the 2018 applications and seek to provide 29 dwellings in the roof on a 4th floor basis. These applications are, for what it's worth on paper, identical. They are not materially different in what they're proposing to put forward in any way. But the 2019 application was refused under delegated powers due to the lack of a sufficient bat survey on the site, as their one from 2018 had kind of lapsed in its suitability to demonstrate there'd be no harm to bats as part of this, as part of the development. This again was then appealed and dismissed on the grounds of a lack of a bat survey and also no Section 106 signed. So we kind of arrive at what we are today with the identical application of 2020 for the 29 dwellings in the roof. This has been supported by a bat survey, which Surrey Wildlife Trust have commented on and are happy with. And therefore we arrive at kind of an officer's recommendation for approval on what's before us now. So I hope that's really clear to everyone how we've kind of got to this point where we are today and why we've brought this to you for decision, as it does fall outside the scheme of delegation for us to approve it. So moving on to the scheme that's before you, this is a block plan showing the proposed layout of the site, building 1, 2 and 3 as they are currently situated on the site, with all the parking around the site, landscaping, and then a leap to the north of the site. Proposed elevation. So what we've got here on the top is what's existing, and on the bottom is what is to be proposed. So they will be removing the dual pitch roofs from the existing ground and first floors, replacing these with flat ceiling roofs. The existing roof will be removed. Although the eaves height kept reasonably similar, they will implement a mansard roof with these kind of small dormer-like windows, balconies, and kind of railings, and these feature gable ends. So I hope that's clear. So the overall height of the built form will generally increase between approximately 14.5 and 15.4 meters. This is an exception on these gable ends where the ridge height will be at its greatest due to kind of the topography of the site, 16.7 or 4 meters. So I'll just run through the elevations. This is building 1. You can see kind of existing structures like this will be removed and rationalized across the site. Building 1 again from a different angle. Building 1 again, showing where it connects. Oops. Building 1 again, building 1 again. And then moving on to building 2. The same style of design is carried throughout the design of both building 1 and 2. Balconies inset, dormer windows again, mansard roofs, and then these feature gable ends. The walkway is to be replaced, which is currently a dual pitch roof, will be a flat roof structure. From the other side, and then the gable ends on building 2. Building 3 is proposed to just increase the ridge height not increase the ridge height, sorry, but increase the roof structure to a dual pitched roof with hipped ends, and also make the buildings a bit more fit for purpose as flats. Again, building 3, and then these are the proposed cycle stores and bin stores, so as you can see here, which are located around the site. Just some coloured elevations for you to maybe make it seem a bit more logical to read. So you can see the mansard roof here, the cedar roofs here, the cladding of the timber on the gable ends, and the lower projections. And then the walkway here with the cedar roof and flat roof again. And then building 3. This is the proposed floor plan, which shows 2-bedroom flats and 1-bedroom flats arranged across building 1 and 2. And then just to highlight that the affordable housing is to be provided throughout the building. So instead of all the affordable housing being provided just on the 4th floor, the applicant has submitted other plans to demonstrate that the affordable housing would be pepper potted throughout the entire flatted development. And that's it. Then the recommendation is that, subject to the conditions in a legal agreement to secure the 9 affordable housing units, LEAP, SUDS, SANG contribution within 6 months from the date of the decision, permission be granted. And the recommendation B is in the event that the section 106 hasn't been agreed, that permission be refused. So yeah, officers are recommending approval for this because it is acceptable development within the green belt. The design and visual amenities acceptable. Highways, biodiversity, habitats and flooding are all acceptable. So yeah, that's it from me.
Thank you. Any questions from members? None so far.
Councillor Follows has his hand up, Chairman.
Councillor Follows.
Oh, thank you, Chair. May I just, if unless he wants to, because Councillor Costa is actually the ward councillor, and I'm happy to defer to him going first if he would like.
Councillor Costa.
Councillor Follows to talk first.
Thank you. So there's a few things with this. I mean, obviously, we can't be talking about the original consent, but the addition of this extra floor, I think, does cause a significant increase in the bulk scale and mass of the building. The one thing I think I probably ever agreed with my predecessor as leader of Godalming Town Council, with former Councillor Stephen Reynolds, when he talked about this last time and described it as a Soviet era hospital. It is a very large structure. It will stand out a great deal in Godalming, and what we're intending to do here is put another story on it with quite a lot of extra housing. So my questions to officers, again, the County Highways Authority, you've obviously in the update sheet noted that they have no objections. Can I just confirm that they attended the site and that their assessment is based on actually looking at the scheme on the ground, particularly because the increase in numbers, I think, is a material increase on the existing consent on roads that are already quite congested, and on an area that is very close by to an area where we've got vulnerable residents that may be using the roads, and there are a number of other issues around that. So for the moment, I'd just like to stick to the highways issues, if you could answer those ones. Thank you.
Jessica.
Hi there. Yeah, I'm looking at the highways consultation response that they've given to us, and it doesn't say that they haven't been to site, which I would assume they would have to write on there if that was the case. I know that in the past, both Richard Peplow and Richard Cooper have attended the site both on this application and others, but I can't concretely tell you that they have visited site. All I can say is that there's not an additional note within the consultation response which says they haven't been able to due to the COVID-19 circumstances.
Councillor Carson.
Thank you very much, Chairman. I have to confess, sometimes I have to consult with Paul to work out which of the many applications in this area is in his ward and mine, as there are several just a few yards across the boundary from each other.
Just in yours, Steve, just by a few feet.
Yes, so I've worked out. Yes, thank you, Paul. I don't like this development. I'm not going to pretend I do. Lots of people in our ward don't like the development, and I think I share the comments of the previous Councillor Reynolds about this, and if it hadn't been permitted development, I hope we'd had a chance to look at it more properly. But we have to address the application in front of us, and I of course understand that. There is one particular issue I wanted to just clarify. In paragraph 22, if I have read, this is about space standards. If I have understood this correctly, what it seems to be saying is the government sets down technical space standards and so on. This proposal does not meet those standards, but we don't actually have a policy as part of our local plan at the moment around these things. Therefore, we shouldn't take this too seriously, which seems a very odd sort of notion to me. I take it actually very seriously. It's all somehow in the nature of this whole development, that somehow it all appears big and bulky and squeezed and profit making, and there's nothing wrong with profit making per se, but there is a feeling that there's not a huge amount of attention being given to the standards, and if it doesn't actually meet those standards, and unless the officers can suggest to me that somehow I've read this wrong, then that's something I would actually want to object to. Otherwise, as much as I tried very hard, I can't find other obvious reasons, having understood the juxtaposition between the 66 and the extra 29, sorry, the 99. I just can't find other reasons, but I do actually have real concerns about the space standards, and ask for some officer comment on that, please.
Jessica, could you comment, please?
Yeah, of course. So yeah, you are correct in ascertaining that the units proposed don't meet the nationally described space standards. It is unfortunate we don't have a policy that we can refuse that on. So we would be unable to demonstrate to an inspector that it is not policy compliant. So therefore we can't refuse that. But what I can say is that we have made sure through what we can control, and that being the affordable units, we've made sure that they all meet the space standards. But other than that, we don't have any force behind us through a policy to be able to substantiate a reason for refusal based on the way that it doesn't meet the nationally described space standards, unfortunately.
Councillor Darcy.
I'd just like to first of all thank Jessica for the very clear explanation of the planning history, which I have been very confused about, but she made it very clear, so thank you for that. It obviously is quite complicated, but it looks to me like they're trying to squeeze too many dwellings into the space, and it is rather Soviet looking and quite ugly, I would have said. But my main concern is, given that this was refused on the grounds of the bats before, or the lack of a bat report, it's strange that the conditions don't include, as far as I can work out, they only include lighting as an issue, but there's not much mention of what was in the bat report as a mitigation strategy, which I think should be conditioned. Including things like the installation of compensatory roosts for the bats, tree hung bat boxes, and that there was something about the roofing membranes being a danger to bats. The modern breathable roofing membranes, they become entangled in them, and so they recommend that type 1 bitumen roofing felt must be used in areas of where the roofs require lining. So again, I think that needs to be in the conditions, because given that bats for that whole reason, and there are a lot of bats, the bat report was very clear. There are a large number of bats that use the river, which is right next to the development. They fly up and down to do their insect catching, and also there were some that were roosting in the building as well. But it's clearly an issue, and I don't think it's been fully addressed. Regarding sustainability, apart from the sedum roofs, which are nice, they look nice and everything, but there's not a huge amount about sustainability really that I could see. It's just meeting all the legal requirements, which is, a big deal. It has to, it's got to do that. So I'm not going to give them any bonus for that. And they haven't done anything about, climate change, no real efforts as far as I can see. And again, there's the landscaping and the design in terms of biodiversity, I think could be improved. There could be more, there could be swift bricks, there could be bird boxes. They could have design that includes wildflower meadows, native shrubs and tree planting and all that sort of thing. And again, that would help at least meet some of the, address some of the issues of how unpleasant it can look. That's all, thank you.
You're muted again, Chairman.
Yes, so I noticed, yes, thank you. Right, I was saying to Jessica, do you believe the conditions as they stand are adequate to deal with the bat, the bat issues that Councillor Darcy mentioned?
Thanks, Chair. Yeah, conditions 9 and 10 of the agenda report do set out that the development will be carried out in strict accordance with the recommendations and actions within the conclusions and recommendations set out in the report, in the ecology report submitted. And then condition 10 requires that a European protected species licence is obtained from Natural England following receipt of the planning permission. And this again would have to undertake all the actions detailed in the method statement, which is to support the EPS licence. So I'm confident that those two conditions together would alleviate the concerns that Councillor Darcy did raise regarding bats.
There were some points about, I think, about planting schemes. I mean, is there a planting scheme that has to be approved by the council before for this development?
Let me just have a look. I know there's one to do with boundary treatments and planting along the edges, but aside from that, I don't know if that's something that we could impose really on this development.
Yeah, since the works are not on the ground, the works are on the.
Yeah, unfortunately, I think it might just go a bit above and beyond the remits of the application if we ask for a detailed landscaping plan.
Yeah, understand. Councillor Goodridge.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I mean, I think having looked at this for the first time, we're in a bit of a hiding to nothing. As I understand it, and I appreciated the history, that we've in effect had 3 identical applications. The first 2 having been lost on appeal by the applicant, but on technical reasons. The section 106 and the back survey being out of date. And therefore, we may think, and I agree, that this building is pretty unattractive. I mean, the original building's not exactly would win design awards, but the new proposal is not very beautiful. Although I think when we saw the coloured thing, it looked slightly better. But I don't think. I mean, the inspector found the design was fine. So, and everything else was fine. So it seems to me that whatever we may think about the application, provided all the technical issues are covered, we would find difficulty finding a planning reason to refuse it in view of the inspector's decisions taken already. I'd be grateful if Jessica could confirm that that's her understanding of it, that basically all the avenues for refusal have been cut away from us in view of the 2 previous appeal decisions, and that we have an identical applications, which, if they are now technically all ducks in a row, it doesn't give us much scope. Thank you.
Jessica, can you confirm that? I mean, that's my understanding, is that the variable conditions are now rather limited.
Yeah, so my my guidance to you on that would be that the inspector reviewed your original overturn reason on the grounds of design and visual amenity, and he concluded that, in his view, he would support the design of the building. So I would say that that's already been assessed by an inspector, and therefore it would seem like you wouldn't get very far, possibly, if that was to be appended as a reason for refusal again on this report. And yeah, all the technical reports and technical consultees have come back and said that, as you said, the ducks are in a row on this one. So I would be cautious if you were to refuse on something that the inspector has already assessed in previous appeals on what is an identical on the face of it scheme.
Okay, thank you very much. Councillor Dinas.
Thank you, Chair. I'm a little bit surprised there's no comment from Godalming Town Council on this one, but that's by the by. What was disappointed in this report when we're talking about accommodation was it doesn't list what the technical standard should be. It doesn't list what they're actually going to provide. So I don't know, is it close or is it a million miles away? So that's my first point. What I'd just like some clarity, and hopefully Jessica can give this. So we know the inspector has said, like, the design for this monstrous building is fine, but the application he's considered that on, were they the same size premises that we're considering today? Because although we don't have a policy, we can still give limited weight to the guidance, because this is about future use as well as the current use. So are we looking at the same size rooms, i.e. they fail, and is that what the inspector considered, or did the inspector actually consider one which complied with the recommendations of size? So I'm just really not sure on that, but that would be good. Thank you, Jessica.
Yeah, Jessica, can you comment on that point? I'm not quite sure whether we're referring to the size of the building or the size of the rooms, but perhaps on both issues.
It's the rooms.
Yeah. So I don't actually have the 2018 application in front of me, and I'd need a little bit of time if you did want me to come up with those, the size of the dwellings proposed on that one. But I would say that what was proposed on that application was 24 dwellings, but subsequently the 29 have been proposed on the previous application, which has also been to an inspector, the 2019 application, which was exactly the same layout, room sizes. And it wasn't brought up as an issue then. So on the 2018 one, there could be a difference because obviously it's 4 or 5 less dwellings. But on the 2019 application, they were the same. So that would be my kind of understanding of that. If you did want me to actually get a comparison, I would need a little bit of time to do that.
Jessica, do I understand the 2019 application was turned down purely on the bat issue? It wasn't turned down on any other ground, is it by this council? Is that correct?
Yeah, so the only reason for refusals were based on the insufficient information regarding bats and then the absence of a legal agreement. So we didn't include a refusal reason because we don't, again, as I said earlier, have a policy reason to be able to hang a refusal reason on space standards alone on.
Yeah, so it sounds to me like any difference in that area from the previous application, the one before 2019, doesn't sound material because it's not, we didn't use it last time against the 2019 application.
No, it wasn't, but then that was under delegated powers.
Okay. Councillor Dinas, do you want something to be looked at here? I mean, it doesn't seem as if it's going to give us a ground.
Not at this stage. I just think it would have saved a lot of time and effort and made it very easy to look at those issues if it had just been in a chart. We seem to get some reports we get it, some reports we don't, and when we don't, we have to ask the questions, which is a shame, really. But no, I accept the answer as it's been given.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Reid.
Thank you, Chair. I want to commend Officer Jessica Robinson. I agree with Councillor Darcy that she has given a very comprehensive report. Thank you very much, Jessica. The need for affordable accommodation is very, we all know it's very important, and the housing is needed. And I'm very pleased to see that it's going to be dotted around throughout the building. Secondly, I'd like to say that although the building looks particularly odd, it looks very familiar to me to the new student accommodation at the University of Surrey. And the last comment I want to make is that I agree with Councillor Darcy in that the landscaping is not particularly desirable. Just because you're living in a 1 or 2 bedroom accommodation doesn't mean to say that you shouldn't have amenity space that is beautiful. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. Councillor Seaborn.
Thank you, Chairman. I'm in a similar sort of place to several of the other speakers. I just want to have one last go at this space issue. Councillor Denis asked for details of how much this particular application failed by. For building 1, the 21 units in that, 17% below the national space standards. So it's not just, it's actually quite significantly below. But really the one point I do want to ask officers to comment on is that in our local plan policy TD1, bullet point 5, it states, maximising opportunities to improve the quality of life and health and well-being of current and future residents. For example, the provision of, and then bullet 2 there states, appropriate internal space standards. What does that actually mean? I mean, it's referenced. We talk about appropriate internal space standards. I appreciate we haven't quoted any anywhere, but if we say we want to adhere to appropriate internal space standards, then I would have thought falling back on national guidelines or national standards would be an appropriate thing. I do have to say that in the first presentation this evening, Alex made a big point of stressing to us that the size of the rooms or the living space in the houses that we looked at conformed with national space standards. So really the question is, what's the point of local plan policy TD1 where it does state appropriate internal space standards should be considered? What does that mean? Thank you, Chairman.
Jessica, do you have can you assist us on that point? What does it all mean?
So I would say my interpretation of policy TD1 is one you look at in the round, I guess, and an appropriate space standard would be appropriate that you could physically live there, I guess, as we don't have a defined technical piece of guidance that's adopted by the local authority. I would say that it is an exercise of judgment in that case. So that if you did feel that that was a sufficient reason for refusal and that an inspector would find on review that these are unacceptable living conditions and do not provide appropriate standards of space, that is an avenue that you could explore with a reason for refusal. But I would say that you'd need to do that in caution, that we don't have anything to back ourselves up on that, and you would be relying on kind of an unadopted into our local plan or our development plan, a piece of guidance that's just these nationally described space standards. So it might be something that kind of in the kind of balancing exercise of providing 29 dwellings, 9 affordable, good location, reuse of redundant building, capitalising on kind of existing sites, it might be something that the inspector feels could be deemed appropriate in that sense. So I would say it's for you to deem what you feel is appropriate, and if these are suboptimal in your opinions and the council's opinion, then that could be an avenue to explore on TD1, but I would say in caution, and they would need to be extremely inappropriate for that harm to be outweighed.
Thank you. Comment from Marie?
Yeah, just to add to what Jess has said, really, that policy doesn't really explain what appropriate is, because we don't have the standards, and it may be that there's an opportunity in local plan part 2 for us to actually state what the standards are, but at this point we don't have anything to refuse it on in that regard.
Yeah, that seems to be the case. And it's a gap in our policy, so we haven't got the power in this case. I think perhaps the final comment, Councillor Follows, can you make it brief, please? You've spoken already.
Yes, of course. Just very, very quickly, the last time this was viewed by anybody at the council, was the Godalming and Farncombe neighbourhood plan in effect and made? Because if it wasn't, the additional things I would add that might weigh in since that are policies God 5, 8 and 12. The first one being character and design, significantly adverse impact on the amenity of neighbours, sympathetic to scale and mass and height. Considering all of the other things around it, it is massive, and adding an extra floor is making it materially more massive. Policy God 8, view from Church Road, Bridge Road to the parish church, that has a defined view on a map that goes across the Lammas lands, which I think is, I mean, this is probably the most tenuous one of the three I've suggested, but I think it probably would be visible from that defined view under God 8. And finally, God 12, Godalming and Farncombe skyline, which again, considering that it is otherwise surrounded by greenbelt and trees, and the town centre of Godalming, which is significantly lower, the nearest buildings of any height are over on Chalk Road itself. This would materially stand out on the skyline in that part. So if this was last reviewed before the Godalming and Farncombe neighbourhood plan was made, then I would propose that these three policies are new from the last time, and would therefore be considerable in this. Not to mention the fact that we passed these neighbourhood plans for a reason, and we should be making sure that we look at them properly. Thank you.
Well, I guess that needs comment. I mean, can one of the officers, or several perhaps, comment on that point as to how the Godalming neighbourhood plan applies here?
Yeah, so I can come to you on that point. So the 2019 application would have been subject to the Godalming neighbourhood plan being made at that time. The 2018 one wouldn't have. But I'd say the inspector would still have considered views, and we as officers have considered views on all of the applications. And I would say that the Godalming neighbourhood plan is in line with the development plan as a whole in its making. So I'd say that these elements of design, mass, bulk, views, interaction with the Godalming skyline have been considered by officers and inspectors. So I would say that even if they have not been expressly referred to, they have been considered, and especially in this application before us today, I've taken the Godalming neighbourhood plan into account.
Okay, right, we've been around this. There are no more speakers. No hands are up, so let's move to the vote then. So Kimberly. So the vote, I'll read out the recommendation. So recommendation, and of course there are two recommendations. The first is A, that subject to conditions 1 to 30, and the 8 additional conditions which were referred to earlier to do with traffic. Informatives 1 to 12, and a legal agreement to secure 9 affordable housing units, LEAP, SUDS and SANG contribution within 6 months from the date of the decision, permission be granted. So 4 is 2.
Mr. Chairman, sorry, I couldn't get my hand up. Can I just tighten up the wording regarding the SANG contribution? It says a SANG contribution in general terms. Could I just amend that to the SANG contribution for the Eashing Lane sang as identified in the report.
Okay.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry, that was Barry. Was that? My view is blocked. That was Barry speaking, I presume.
Yes, it was, Mr. Chair.
Yes.
Yeah, I think there's a little too vagueness in scope in terms of that resolution, which we will have to ensure is conformed to when we devise Section 106. So we need to iron out any ambivalence whatsoever.
Okay.
So
right. So it's as on the sheet plus with additional 8 additional conditions and the clarification on the
wording regarding the sang.
On the same point, yeah, as Barry has pointed out.
Yeah.
And in fact, we've got both in front of us. So and the recommendation B is that in the case that satisfactory 106 agreement is not completed within 6 months of the date of resolution to grant planning permission be refused, as it says there. So we're voting on both at this time. So please vote. Perhaps you already have.
Thank you, Chairman. On the recommendation to grant planning permission, that's carried by 7 votes to 4 against with 3 abstentions. And the recommendation B to refuse planning permission in the event that the legal agreement isn't completed within 6 months of the resolution to grant, that's 100% in favour of that.
Thank you, members. Item 10, exclusion of press and public. There's no reason to do that. So thank you very much for your attention. I thought it was a good meeting. Thank you very much. Cheerio.
Thank you, Chair. Good night.
Thank you, Chairman.
Good night. Good night, Mr. Chairman.
Bye.